So we're moving on to item 10 on our agenda. Commissioners, before we start item 10, anybody need a quick 5-10 minute break? Yeah?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right, let's keep going. We are rolling. Item 10 on our agenda. This is preliminary plan of subdivision 4-23008, Capital Beltway 2. Mr. Haller is representing the applicant. Ms. Gupta is going to be giving the staff presentation. This is an evidentiary hearing. I believe we have a number of folks who signed up to speak. I am actually going to try, we'll confirm this, but I'm going to ask everybody who is looking to speak on this matter to come online so I can swear everybody in at once. Confirm that you've been sworn in as you come up, but it'll save us a little bit of time if I can just do a request to take the oath.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Mr.
Commissioner.
Before you give the oath, I'm going to recuse myself from this proceeding for the appearance of a conflict.
Okay, you broke up a bit. You said you were going to recuse yourself for the appearance of a conflict.
Right, to avoid an appearance of any conflict. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. This is the last case before us today, so feel free to hang around or not because we have a quorum, Commissioner. And so if there's no concerns or comments from any of my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Giraldo will be recusing himself from this case to avoid the appearance of a conflict. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank
All right,
you.
so we have everyone who is looking to speak. And again, I'll confirm that you've been sworn in when it's your turn to speak. And if I miss you, I'll swear you in again. But if I could ask everybody to raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
I do.
Okay, consider yourselves under oath. And again, I'll confirm that when we get to that time. We'll start with the staff presentation. Let me just lay out some ground rules on this. We'll start with the staff presentation, then we'll hear from the applicant. After we hear from the applicant, then we'll hear from the other parties, from the public. I'll be mindful of how much time the applicant has so that the folks in the public, broadly define the opposition, will also have about the same amount of time. In any case, any individual has the right to speak for up to 3 minutes based on our rules, and anyone who's representing an organization, that doesn't mean being a member of an organization. If you're an officer of the organization speaking on behalf of the organization, then you have up to 5 minutes to speak. But broadly, we'll make sure that there's a general balance between the totality of the opposition and the applicant. Then we'll make sure, as is our practice, we'll make sure the applicant has the last word, and then we will, the commission will then enter deliberation and consider any action if that's appropriate at the time. So that'll be the process. We'll start with the staff. Ms. Gupta, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And again, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, I'm Ridula Gupta with the subdivision section. Item number 10 on the agenda is a preliminary plan of subdivision 4-23008, titled Capital Beltway 2. This subdivision proposes one parcel and one outlot for 140,896 square feet of industrial development, specifically a warehouse. As a matter of housekeeping, the additional backup includes 11 exhibits received from the applicant and 24 letters from citizens and community associations prior to the Tuesday noon deadline. Next slide. This 17.8 acre site is located within Planning Area 80 and Council District 8. Next slide. More specifically, the site is located at the terminus of Taylor Acres Avenue, approximately quarter mile north of the intersection of Oxon Hill Road and Livingston Road. Next slide. The subject site, highlighted in red, is split zoned. Approximately 10.4 acres of the property is within the industrial employment zone, and the remaining 7.4 acres of the property is within the agriculture and preservation zone. This preliminary plan of subdivision is, however, reviewed in accordance with the site's prior light industrial or I1 zone and open space or OS zone, and the prior zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. For board's indulgence, staff would like to clarify that a preliminary plan of subdivision does not approve the use, but analyzes the subdivision layout with the applicable standards of the subdivision regulations and the applicable recommendations of the master plan in context with the proposed use. The prior I1 zone permits a variety of labor-intensive light industrial uses, including the proposed warehouse. This application is supported by and subject to an approved Certificate of Adequacy ADQ-2023-014 included in the backup, which ensures adequate public facilities to support the proposed land use. The Certificate of Adequacy was approved with conditions in accordance with Section 24-1904C of the subdivision regulations. Next slide. This is an aerial view of the site, which has been in use since the 1950s as a vehicle salvage yard. Several structures currently exist on the subject property, which are to be raised, except for one structure that's an accessory to a commercial use on the abutting property. The subject property is bound to the northwest, west, and southwest by the Henson Creek Stream Valley Park. The property is bounded to the northeast by industrial uses and to the east, southeast, and south by commercial uses. Next slide. The site map shows the site topography, which is generally flat and slopes towards the Henson Creek. Next slide. This slide shows the master plan rights-of-way located in the vicinity of the site. Next slide. This slide shows the proposed preliminary plan of subdivision. The subject site is outlined in red and the existing public rights-of-way in light purple. The primary management area, or PMA, is highlighted in pink. Henson Creek is located along the western boundary, and Hunter's Mill Branch is along the southern property boundary. The PMA includes the 100-year floodplain, stream buffer, and steep slopes associated with these streams. The subject property is proposed to be subdivided into Parcel 1, consisting of all property area within the prior I1 zone, and Outlot A, consisting of the property area located within the prior OS zone. The applicant proposes development of the warehouse on Parcel 1. Parcel 1 is proposed to have frontage on and direct access to Taylor Acres Avenue, which is situated to the east of the subject property. Outlot A does not have frontage on a public street and therefore does not meet the minimum requirements for a buildable lot. Outlot A is proposed for woodland preservation. Currently, Taylor Acres Avenue exists as a 50-foot wide right-of-way, terminating at the boundary of the subject property. The preliminary plan of subdivision proposes vacating a portion of the existing right-of-way, which is highlighted in blue, and dedicating additional right-of-way that's highlighted in deep purple in order to provide an appropriate terminus of Taylor Acres Avenue in a cul-de-sac. The subject property does not have frontage on any other public right-of-way. Next slide. This slide shows the proposed Type 1 tree conservation plan. The subject property is outlined in red and the existing public rights-of-way in light purple, and the PMA is highlighted in pink. The previous vehicle salvage yard operation comprised most of the property, with clearing of woodlands within and along the regulated environmental features. This preliminary plan proposes to mitigate the prior clearing through meeting the entire woodland conservation requirement on site by preserving the existing woodlands and supplementing those areas by reforesting open floodplain areas. The total woodland conservation requirement for the project is 3.01 acres. This requirement is proposed to be met with 3.16 acre of on-site preservation and reforestation, which is in excess of the minimum required. The applicant filed a request for a variance to section 25-122B1G of the 2010 Prince George's County Woodland and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Ordinance for the removal of 2 specimen trees that are marked on the slide with red crosses. This variance request is detailed further on pages 23 to 26 in the staff report. Staff requests that the applicant provide an additional half acre of afforestation. Kenny, could you go to the next slide? I'm looking at yeah, thanks. Staff requests that the applicant provide an additional half acre of afforestation, abutting the proposed afforestation on the western side of the property. This additional afforestation area is highlighted in bright green. Staff requests that this additional half acre of afforestation be planted with a larger 3.5-inch caliper native shade trees. This will ensure a better survival rate, achieve a fuller tree canopy sooner, and mitigate the proposed removal of the 2 specimen trees. Next slide. The prior use of the property resulted in environmental contamination, which requires remediation. The applicant is participating in Maryland Department of the Environment's voluntary cleanup program and will be removing known environmental contaminants and removing impervious surface areas, particularly in the western portion of the property approaching Henson Creek, as well as reforesting the area. The PMA of the site, highlighted on the slide in pink, was heavily impacted during the site's use for more than 50 years as a vehicle salvage yard. With this preliminary plan of subdivision, additional impacts to the PMA are requested, which are highlighted on the slide in yellow. These impacts are required for site restoration work, floodplain compensatory storage, site access, the proposed building, and stormwater management. The 6 requested PMA impacts and staff analysis of these impacts is detailed further on pages 23 to 30 in the staff report. Staff support the proposed PMA impact areas, conditional upon providing an additional half acre of afforestation as depicted on the previous slide. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the additional backup includes 11 exhibits received from the applicant and 24 letters from citizens and community associations. The applicant has not requested revisions to any recommended conditions of approval by staff. Staff reviewed the letters received from citizens and community associations, and I'll summarize the concerns raised in these letters. There were concerns about safety and walkability of the neighborhood. There were claims that the site was not posted as required with notice of public hearing. The letters included claims that the development proposal contradicts the 2006 approved Henson Creek South Potomac Master Plan, that the proposed warehouse poses environmental risks and health impacts to citizens, including noise, air, and water pollution. There were concerns regarding the increase in trucks on Livingston Road and that the project will add traffic to existing congested roadways in the neighborhood. There were concerns that the project is within 1,000 feet of existing and proposed residential development, and also that the proposed development is discriminatory and will impact quality of life. There were 2 letters received that were in support of the project. Regarding concerns of safety and walkability of the neighborhood, the applicant will be required to provide ADA accessible sidewalks along the property's frontage on the public street, which is Taylor Acres Avenue. All frontage improvements in addition to the sidewalks, will be reviewed and approved by DPI and DPWT, which are the operating agencies for county-maintained roads. Regarding site posting, the applicant submitted an affidavit stating that a notice of public hearing was posted on the property as required by the county code. Staff evaluated conformance of the preliminary plan to the 2006 approved Henson Creek South Potomac Master Plan, and its evaluation is included on pages 5 through 10 of the technical staff report. The master plan identifies numerous guidelines and strategies for the subject property and the surrounding area, and places the property in the Henson Creek Transit Village. The technical staff report identifies applicable guidelines and strategies, but the Prince George's County District Council has also zoned the subject property I-1 under the prior zoning ordinance, which permits distribution warehouse uses as of right. With respect to traffic, the approved certificate of adequacy evaluated the impact of this development on transportation facilities and imposes limits on peak hour vehicle trips and requires the construction of improvements to existing roadways. Regarding concerns of pollution, the project will be required to meet the county's and state's regulatory requirements related to noise control, dust control, erosion and sediment control, stormwater quality and quantity at the time of permitting. Next slide. In conclusion, based on the findings presented in the technical staff report, staff recommend that the planning board approve this preliminary plan of subdivision 4-23008, type 1 tree conservation plan, TCP 1-007-2024, and variance from section 25-122B1G, subject to the findings and conditions in the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta. Commissioners, do we have questions for staff at this point?
Not at this time.
Okay, not at this time. Thank you, Ms. Gupta. Let's turn to the applicant, Mr. Hauer. If you could take it away, the floor is yours. I'm sure you want to introduce members of your team as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. Thomas Haller, I'm an attorney with offices in Largo, and I'm here today on behalf of the applicant, which is Prologis. I do want to thank staff for working with us on this site. The site does have some challenges based on prior use of the property, which I'll discuss in greater detail. We have worked closely to address all of those requirements and are very proud of the final product that we're able to present to the Planning Board today. As the chairman noted, there are several members of our team who have signed up and are available to speak and to answer questions. I do want to note that on behalf of Prologis, we have Danielle Schlein, Jennifer Guckin, David Kerner, and Ken Simmons. We have three representatives of our engineering team with KCI, Nick Barrick, Nicole Heinlein, and Michael Blanco. We have a traffic consultant, Mr. Mike Lenhart. We have our land planning consultant, Mr. Ken Dunn, with engineering firm of Soltez. And we also have Mr. David Berry, who is with our environmental consultant, Vertex Companies. I will be, they are mostly available to answer questions, but I will have Mr. Dunn address a couple of the questions that have been raised in the letters that were submitted to the Planning Board. I do want to note real briefly at the outset that there was a question raised at the time in the letters from some of the community members about the posting of the sign. And I did want to note, and for the benefit of the board and any of the community members online, when a site is ready for posting, the applicant receives an email from staff indicating that the site is ready to be posted. We received that email on August the 2nd of this year, and we were notified that the sign needed to be posted no later than August 6th. The KCI posted the sign on August 6th, and under the posting guidelines, we are required to put the sign where instructed by Park and Planning. We were provided a map with the email on August 2nd telling us where to post the sign, and that was at the terminus of Taylor Acres Avenue, and that's where the sign was posted. The statute also requires that we go out and inspect the sign no later than 15 days after posting, which was done on August 16th. When that inspection occurred, the sign had been removed from the stakes that it was on, but it was in front of the stakes. It was reposted. And then because it was removed previously, we had it monitored from that point on, and it remained posted, and this is in fact up to date. So from the standpoint of posting, the sign was posted where required by Park and Planning, and it was maintained throughout the course of the posting period. So I did want to let the board know that was done, and it was posted in conformance with all of the requirements. As I mentioned briefly, the applicant in this case is Prologis, and Prologis has presented prior applications to the planning board, but you may not be aware that Prologis is a global leader in the development of and long-term ownership of logistics facilities, not just in the United States, but globally. If I could ask Mr. Flanagan to put up our PowerPoint presentation. I just have a couple of slides that I want the board to be able to see. If you could go to the next page. No, the one before that. There you go. And so Prologis is in the business of building logistics warehouses, and they own them for long periods of time. They are a company which is committed to responsible and sustainable development, and by implementing corporate-wide standards for energy use, water efficiency, carbon footprint reduction, and the creation of healthy environments. One example of their commitment to sustainability is that any building constructed on this site by them will be designed to achieve LEED certification. That is a corporate standard that they follow in all locations. It is not required by code, but it's something that they do as a corporate commitment to sustainability. Prologis also has a major presence in the Washington, Baltimore, and Northern Virginia market. They own over 150 buildings in this Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia market with over 20 million square feet of industrial space. But they've also invested heavily over the years in Prince George's County. Prologis has been in Prince George's County for over 20 years, and they own 15 buildings, which are leased to 28 separate tenants and employ over 1,200 workers. So Prince George's County has a long history of owning and operating facilities in Prince George's County, and has partnered with Prince George's County on employment initiatives and community participation events because they are a responsible corporate citizen. One evidence of that is one of the letters submitted to the planning board was a letter from the Economic Development Corporation in support of this application and the development of the property. Prologis was attracted to this specific site because it is zoned industrial, and it's located in a major transportation corridor close to the Beltway. As you can see from looking at the staff report, the site has had pre-existing environmental conditions which resulted from a prior use of the property. And due to Prologis's extensive experience in developing properties around the country and around the world, they have experience in dealing with difficult sites. And so they really were the perfect partner to address the challenges that this site presented. Now, regarding those challenges, if I could ask Mr. Flanagan to go to the next screen. Staff mentioned that the one after that, please. Thank you. I'm sorry. There we go. As staff mentioned, the property has been used as a vehicle salvage yard since the 1950s. There aren't photos on PG Atlas that go back that far, but we can go back to 1965. And you can see in 1965, this entire property was had been cleared and was being used as a vehicle salvage yard. And that usage continued until 2021 when Prologis purchased the property. They purchased the property in August of 21. And before they did that, they had environmental analyses prepared by their environmental consultant. But you can see that the eastern 10 acres of the property, which is zoned industrial, was used for the vehicle salvage, and the western 7.4 acres was also used for vehicle salvage. Now, with regard to the zoning history, when the Subregion 7 sectional map amendment was adopted in 1984, 40 years ago, the zoning of this property was established. That the western 7 acres was placed in the OS zone, and the eastern 10 acres was placed in the I1 zone. And when that was done, the master plan identified the desire for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission to acquire land along the Stream Valley Park for Henson Creek. And in fact, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission owns the property to the west of this property along Henson Creek, to the north of this property along Henson Creek, and to the south of this property along Henson Creek. This is one area that Park and Planning Commission does not own. And so that is why the western half of the property was placed in the OS zone. But as I said, Prologis acquired the property in August of 21, and they did have environmental studies done. And not surprisingly, the property was found to be contaminated. You know, vehicle salvage yards have batteries, catalytic converters, radiators, and fuel tanks, which can leak oils, solvents, and other substances if they're not properly handled. And this use started long before the environmental legislation was adopted, which established best practice for these types of uses in the 1970s and 1980s. I would also note that when the property was used and has been used historically, there are no stormwater management facilities installed on the property. The water was just running into Henson Creek and to Hunter's Mill Branch on the southern property line without any kind of quality or quantity control. So I did provide in the supplemental materials that I submitted a copy of our phase 1 and phase 2 environmental studies that were performed by our environmental consultant, Vertex. And I also provided just an executive summary that Vertex prepared of the cleanup efforts. And as I mentioned, we do have a representative from Vertex here if you have any questions, but I had Vertex do the executive summary because the environmental studies are have a lot of documentation in them, a lot of soil studies. And in our meetings with the community that we work with, they asked us for copies of those studies, and we provided those to the community as well. But after acquiring the property in August of 21, Prologis stopped the vehicle salvage operation and began the cleanup of the property. Approximately 15 tons of contaminated soil were removed from the site, and they were properly disposed of in facilities in the county and in Northern Virginia that accept contaminated soils. And then Prologis also participated in the Maryland Department of the Environment's voluntary cleanup program following this remediation work. And MDE issued a notice of no further requirements determination, which is found in the backup that was provided to you on pages 51 to 67, as well as an environmental covenant, which was entered into and recorded in the land records. And a copy of that is in your backup at pages 68 to 86. But what both of these documents indicate is that while the property has been cleaned up, it is only cleaned up to allow industrial development. It is not approved for use as commercial or residential development because of the nature of the contamination. I do think it's significant to note, though, that the soils tests and the studies that we did on the property did confirm that the contaminants are not leaking into Henson Creek or into Hunter's Mill Branch abutting the property. So while the property is limited use or is restricted use, it is safe for that use as long as it's developed in accordance with the environmental covenant and MDE's guidelines, which is what Prologis intends to do. So Prologis has invested an incredible amount of money to clean up this site and to allow it to be used consistent with the existing zoning. But I do want to note that there is still work for them to do. You saw from the aerials that the entire property is paved. currently 11.7 acres of the property is impervious surface with no stormwater management. Prologis proposed their proposed development will remove the remaining existing impervious areas from the property that is zoned OS on the western part of the site. And in addition to that, as I previously mentioned, the property was identified as potential future conveyance to Park and Planning in 1984. And so we contacted the Department of Parks and Recreation early on in the process and asked if they would be interested in taking title to the property. And they indicated that they were interested. And so Prologis has proposed to donate the western 7.4 acres of the property to the Department of Parks and Recreation after they remove the remaining impervious area. And then in addition to that, that property will be afforested so that it is reestablished as a wooded buffer along Henson Creek. Staff noted that they had requested that an additional ½ acre be forested over and above what we had already proposed to the Department of Parks and Recreation, and we are perfectly 100% fine with that. They also asked that we use larger plant stock in that additional ½ acre, and we're again 100% on board with doing that as well. So upon the completion of this development, the Park and Planning will now own both sides of the Henson Creek Stream Valley behind this property. The property will be forested, and then the property has been remediated so that it is not leaching any kind of contaminants into the adjoining streams. I also want to note that as the property is developed, it will have stormwater management facilities installed. Although let me ask Mr. Fannelon to go to the next photographs real quick, because I do want to show you that the current state of the property after it was cleaned up. As you can see, before the property was cleaned up, there were cars all over it. You can see that in the aerial photographs. And there literally was nothing that prevented any of those contaminants from potentially running off the property after the property was restored. But there, as I said, there's still a large area of impervious surfaces which still needs to be removed and properly disposed of. So if you could go to the next photo again, or the next image. So as I said, as staff has noted, the proposal here is to develop the property with a warehouse. That development will be in the industrially zoned part of the property. The entire western 7.4 acres will be conveyed to Park and Planning and will be vegetated and a forested buffer is reestablished along Henson Creek. But as with any new development under current regulations, the site will be improved with stormwater management facilities. As staff also noted, the property is impacted by 100-year floodplain that needs to be addressed in order to allow for proper access to the facility. And so as part of the planning for this site, the applicant was required to work with the Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement to get a waiver of get a floodplain waiver. And as part of the development of the site, there will be attenuation of the 100-year storm on site. There will be full stormwater management facilities to ensure that all future runoff will be adequately treated. And that runoff will be treated not only for our site, but from the road that comes into the site, as well as to the two adjoining commercial properties immediately abutting us to the east. And so the end result of this development is going to be a vast improvement in the quality of the water that is running into the adjoining streams. And I would also note that the impervious area on the site will be reduced from where it is today at 11.4 acres down to 7.6 acres, excuse me, 6.2 acres, which is a reduction in impervious area of over 40% of where it is today. As I mentioned, I do have representatives of KCI who have signed up to speak if there's any questions about the stormwater management, the flood plain waiver that we obtained approval of, or any of the forestation that we are proposing. The environmental contamination and the former existing improvements did complicate the ability to develop the site. And before this application was submitted, we did have to go through several pre-application approval processes. I mentioned we have had to obtain a floodplain waiver, but we also obtained approval of a site development concept plan before the application was even accepted. So even though this is a simple subdivision to create one lot for industrial development and one outlot for conveyance to the Department of Parks and Recreation, it has literally taken Prologis 3 years to get to this point to address these prior issues. And I am pleased to say that, as I noted at the outset, that we support the staff recommendations. We agree to all of the proposed conditions without any modification. There's one final issue that I did want to note. Staff mentioned that in some of the letters submitted by the community, there were some questions about conformance with some of the recommendations in the master plan. And while community planning did provide a 10-page memo responding to the specific issues related to the 2006 Henderson Creek plan, there were also some questions that were raised regarding the 2021 study, which was for this Henderson Creek Transit Village area. And so we requested our land planning consultant, Mr. Ken Dunn, to look at both of those issues and to prepare a short analysis as to conformance of the property with the master plan. And Mr. Dunn in his research did note one error in the staff's analysis regarding the Henderson Creek master plan. And so I'd like to have Mr. Dunn address the board briefly with regard to his findings. And I did want to note that his resume is included in the backup that I submitted as Exhibit F to my letter to the chairman, and his analysis is Exhibit G. But I'm going to ask Mr. Dunn just to briefly review his analysis for the planning board.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. You were sworn in.
Yes, I was.
Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the Prince George's County Planning Board. My name is Ken Dunn. I'm with Soltez. It's good to see you all again. I am, through the American Planning Association, a certified planner, and I have written my testimony. You've been presented with that already. I did want to take a small amount of time just to emphasize that I believe, in my opinion, that this application meets the requirements for a preliminary plan of subdivision as found in subtitle 24. And to get into some of those details, the 2006 approved Henderson Creek South Potomac Master Plan and Sectional Map Amendment is one of the pertinent documents in the review of the case. It is actually part of what is found in subtitle 24 is necessary to comply with preliminary plan of subdivision approvals. A review of that master plan shows that the site is in conformance, and but despite the staff report erroneously identifying the site as lying within Area A of the Henderson Creek Transit Village. In my written backup testimony, there was I had prepared an exhibit that demonstrates where the site is in relationship to the Henderson Creek Transit Village, and it lies just to the west of the boundary of that designation of the
Mr. Dunn, I don't mean to interrupt, but if I could ask Mr. Flanagan to go to the last image on the PowerPoint.
Thank you,
There
Tom.
you go.
Yeah, and not to spend too much time on this, but you can see in blue there, I've identified the location of the site, and it is just to the west of the black dashed line that designates the boundary of the Henderson Creek Transit Village. So it is outside of that boundary. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the 2021 Henderson Creek study is irrelevant. It does have quite a bit of useful information. I'll get to that in a minute. It should be noted, again, that the site shown on map 8 is from the 2006 master plan, right? The 2006 master plan wanted to create a mixed-use activity center around the Henderson Creek Transit Village. Page 25 identifies it as a specific location where residential, commercial, retail, office, civic, recreation, and open space land use should be encouraged. The proposed use as part of the preliminary plan, although preliminary plans do not approve uses, it's still part of the application, and allowed use within the I-1 zone is what the applicant is proposing. That use is a portion of the mix of uses suggested And in addition, under the OS zone, which is the back half of the property that Mr. Haller described earlier, we also bring in uses such as open space and recreation. So in my opinion, we've got commercial, open space, and recreation as part of the uses on the site. And that is the identified mix of uses that was suggested in the master plan. The additional document that was prepared by Park and Planning titled the Henson Creek Village Area Study, done in 2021, was not an amendment to the master plan and therefore need not be considered as part of the preliminary plan deliberations, nevertheless has some relevance. While there are specific recommendations for what they refer to as sub-area 2 or the residential district on page 26, these cannot be implemented as the I-1 zone for this specific site does not allow for residential at the in that zone. Additionally, as Mr. Haller has indicated earlier, there are limitations to what could be done as residential uses on the site due to the environmental constraints and the voluntary cleanup under the MDE program that has been discussed. There are, however, on page 24 of the 2021 Henson Creek study, some relevant suggestions which we are pursuing. Those would include preserving, protecting, and restoring natural areas and functions, expanding the park and the trail network, and redeveloping existing impervious areas in accordance with the floodplain and stormwater management regulations. Those are directly out of the 2021 plan. All of those activities are being done on this site by the applicant. So in brief, in an effort to stay within the timeframes mentioned earlier, it's my opinion that the preliminary plan as presented meets the purposes of the preliminary plan as required by subtitle 24 and should be approved. Happy to answer any further questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. If there aren't any questions for Mr. Dunn, I just wanted to indicate that I'm going to close my presentation at this point and give others who have signed up the opportunity to speak. But I do want to say in conclusion that while we understand that several people do not want the proposed development, we did want the board to understand the challenges that the site faced and still faces in order to be utilized. And we wanted the board to be aware of the extensive efforts that have already been undertaken by Prologis to improve the site and actually enhance the property with the proposed development. As I mentioned at the beginning of my comments, Prologis is a responsible corporate citizen and it really is uniquely situated to be able to address the challenges that this property presents due to its past use. So thank you for the opportunity to present this case, and I look forward to responding to any questions or comments that may come up.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Commissioners, at this time, are there any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Heller, if I can.
Mr. Dorner.
So one of the kind of requests when I was looking at can we flip over to the conceptual? Actually, this is a pretty good shot, but with the conceptual site plan, if we still have, I'm only kidding if we've got the slides that Mr. Heller had shared. If we don't, then this one will work.
The one that shows the building?
Yeah, exactly. So what I wanted to request, Mr. Heller, I don't know which way the vote's going to necessarily go on this, but if it does go in your favor and this gets approved, one of the things I would like to request that you do is you keep, which I know you've already got the documentation of the cleanup and stuff on the west side of that property. If you can keep the documentation and share that with the Parks and Recreation Department, because we went to a conference in a month ago, and one of the sessions that actually Chair Shapiro and myself were in, including, I think, yeah, Commissioner Geraldo also went to it. They had a session on how stream restoration has happened and sort of seeing the restoration of the process over time, going from like cleanups and just like really changing streams where they're changing shapes, where it's destroying some of like the fallout and stuff. And that whole like green area that you've got to the left where you've got the 75-foot buffer and stuff, showing how that progressively is filled in and over the time, over a couple of years, how some of the vegetation and stuff will kind of come back into that area. I think this would be a particularly good site if it does go through to document that over time. and demonstrate how we can protect stream watersheds on the Henson Creek that are around our parks and stuff, since if it goes through and we would get both sides of the stream that would be within our sort of assets, that would be a really helpful way of collaborating, if you don't mind. One of the questions I did want to ask, though, specific to the application, is when I'm looking at this this rendering here, I understand that you've done a ton of cleanup from the environmental kind of challenges that you've encountered on the site from the prior usage. But when I look at it, I see this, it just sticks out, the roof. It's a lot of impervious surface still there. So I know that this has been costly to you, but I'm wondering what kind of plans you have for solar, or for different kinds of, like maybe a green roof or whatever would be environmentally friendly in there. Because I'm looking at this and seeing just a lot of continued impervious surface in that area. And I know you can't do much to the asphalt because of the weight of the truck. So there's going to be some limitations in terms of what you can do there. But that roof, I think, is just, to me, screaming some sort of a green technique and something that you could potentially even put back into the community. Some of the complaints in the letters that the opposition have raised were about differences in access to jobs and sort of economic justice sort of questions. And there might even be an opportunity here for you to partner with, like, some of the local solar companies that are trying to put electricity back into the communities, and there's grants and stuff for that. So I wanted to ask, like, what kind of plans do you have for potentially turning that into from an eyesore to something that could actually be useful for the community?
Thank you, Commissioner. And that is, I appreciate that question. And in our meetings with the community over the past year or so, that is something that has been asked. Prologis, I mentioned earlier, they have a number of corporate programs for sustainability. Every one of their buildings, and this one as well, is constructed to structurally to accommodate a solar roof. The actual implementation of the solar roof depends upon the tenant that they get. They don't have a tenant for this building right now, but if the tenant wants the roof to be solar, which can provide electricity not only for the building, but also, to your point, into the community, then they will do that. They have a similar program with making sure that the entire site is EV ready as well for the vehicles. So this is something that Prologis does on their buildings because they want to stay ahead of the trends and be in a position where this site can be developed and operate as sustainably as possible.
Okay, the EV was going to be my follow-up question, so that's good. You beat me to that. But then I just wanted to push you a little bit more, like, instead of just waiting for the tenant to do it, why don't you just do it ahead of time? And that would potentially be more attractive to the tenant, and it could also be something you could work out with the community as well.
I'm gonna start to answer that question, but I think Danielle Schlein with Prologis may want to add a little bit more to that. But obviously, as they have tenants that look at the site, not necessarily every tenant wants to have that capacity, and so they don't want to put themselves in a position where they chase away potential tenants because of it. But I'll ask Danielle to maybe address that as well.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and good morning, council members. I'm Danielle Schlein.
Ms. Schlein, before you go, just want to make sure you've been sworn in.
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Please continue.
Sure, absolutely. I'm the market officer for Prologis and responsible for leasing our buildings. So in order to maximize our marketing efforts, we would not necessarily, we build to solar capacity. So this roof will be ready to put solar on, but because we don't know the tenant that will lease the space, they may have extra HVAC equipment on the roof. They may have other things that we need to work around. So it's absolutely our intent to match our customers' needs and the community's needs. However, we cannot do that proactively until we know who the customer is. I do also want to add that we are very active in the community solar program in Maryland in particular. We have started about 10 projects so far this year. So it is something that is absolutely we are focused on.
Okay, so what if, let me just ask you, what if a tenant doesn't want solar? Would you do something else that would be like a green aspect of that. So I don't know from like an environmental standpoint if it's better to have like the white roofs that would reflect the sun more, or to have like the green roofs that would have vegetation and stuff up there, which would just reduce some of the temperatures in the areas and stuff like that, and just be a little more green in itself. But would you be able to commit to some other kind of green aspect around that?
So we do typically use white TPO roofs, and that is what we have planned for this building.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Line. Other questions from commissioners for the applicant at this point?
Yeah, I just wanted, Mr. Howell, if you could just give us a little bit more color also on the specimen trees that you're going to be removing, particularly the ones that are up on the top kind of part of that parcel. There were two, I think, that were up there. And I just wanted to find out a little bit more of what happened with those two.
Yeah, sure. Those two trees are located along the north property line and are kind of they kind of grew through debris that has accumulated over time as a result of the operation of the prior salvage yard. And so as part of the removal of all of the asphalt and all of the debris that's around that, we're going to impact the critical root zone. And so we can't keep those trees and clean up the site at the same time. So the other specimen trees on site we are retaining, but the two northern ones, the two in the very northern part of the property that you see with the X, those are the two that we have to remove in order to be able to complete the remediation and the removal of the debris on the site.
Okay. And how many other specimen trees, or how many other trees are you going to be putting in that would be kind of similar in I guess not in terms of size potentially, but that would be similar in some sort of a nature to those two?
I mean, all of the trees that we're going to plant will be native trees, if that's your question. And then, as I said, in our conversations with Department of Parks and Recreation, as well as with the condition of staff, all of the trees that we're planting on proposed outlot A will be larger than the typical size requirements that we're allowed to do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all that I have for right now.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. Other questions, other commissioners? I have none at this point. I'm sure we will get back to them. So let's turn to the folks from the public. We have a number of folks decided to speak. Again, ground rules on this. The applicant took about 25 minutes. Given the number of folks decided to speak, if we give everybody up to 3 minutes for individuals, up to 5 minutes for organization officers, that'll be more than that. So we'll have that appropriate balance. So I'm just going to go through the list that I have based on the speakers list. I'm going to make one change though in the order that I have. I believe we have Delegate Woods with us. Delegate Woods, are you looking to speak? And
yes,
so I certainly want to give you the opportunity to go first. I'll do the same thing with you as an individual. If you can, I'll certainly give you a little latitude, but if we'll put 3 minutes up on the clock to help us manage the time. And if you could, and you were sworn in, correct, Elliot?
yes, I was.
Okay, all right. Take it away. We don't see you, by the way. I hear you, but I don't see you. You don't need to be on camera. I'm just letting you know.
Can you see me now?
I don't see you. No.
Okay, I have camera turned on. Let's try anything. Can you see me?
Now we can see you. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you for the to speak. I am speaking on behalf of the community members who've articulated their concerns to me, and I am definitely concerned about some of the information that they've articulated. And so I definitely want to talk about, first and foremost, if you're talking about bringing this project to our area in the 26th Legislative District, I'd like to know what assurances you can provide that any future tenant will intentionally become an asset with regard to ensuring the concerns that were made about economic justice. I understand now that there are restrictions to any residential use. However, commercial, office, civic recreation, open spaces, some of the things that we have a concern about to improve our neighborhood, to assure that we have a healthy, thriving community with development that appreciates overall, that will increase the residential opportunity to utilize that space in a way that will help to improve the neighborhood, that will help to bring business. I'm also concerned that any tenant would have to be be able to agree to address the concerns that we have of how we can assure, you talked about the fact that one of the things that made this beneficial was its access to the Beltway, the closeness to the Beltway. However, in our area where we're talking about on Indian Head Highway 210, we have a huge bottleneck of traffic from the DMV, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. And I'm very concerned that this station would in fact further negatively impact current transportation difficulties. And so, and that in addition to, needless to say, having concerns about the trucks idling, the geographical, environmental, transportation impact, noise, air pollution, stormwater drainage, and so forth. And again, what's important to us is that, we are looking at improving, we are looking at ways that we improve the neighborhood, that we have these commissions that say these comprehensive plans, like specifically for Henson Creek in that area, that would be a tremendous improvement to the area as it relates to providing nice restaurants, providing an area where people can work, pray, and play. That's a healthy and sustainable area. And so these are the concerns that I have, and I would like to address. We talked about having a possible community benefits agreement, and I would like to see something that definitely intentionally would be included by any tenant that would be proposed to be in this facility. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Delegate Woods. Let me just say thank you for all of your representation, leadership on this and other issues. So this is and this is less for you, but more for the public as well. But this is the preliminary plan of subdivision, and a lot of the issues that you're addressing, there will be an opportunity, assuming that there is a detailed site plan, that a lot of these issues that you're addressing are the kinds of issues that get taken up at that stage. So by no means is there a missed opportunity related to that? And I will do my part, as my colleagues always do, to make sure that the voice of the community is heard, and any kind of agreement that you're talking about, we would certainly encourage. So thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for being patient with us and for sharing your words with us as well.
Thank you.
All right, now let me go through the list that we have. I'm going to start with Michael Leventhal, Conservancy of Broad Creek. I assume you are representing that organization, so we'll put up to 5 minutes on the clock, Mr. Leventhal, and to help us manage the time, and if you could introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours, sir. You're on mute, Mr. Leventhal. That's all right. We've all been there and done that.
I'm somewhat of a Luddite, so I apologize.
Sorry.
I'm Michael Leventhal, and I'm the president of the Board of Trustees for the Conservancy of Broad Creek. The Conservancy goals are to protect, promote, and advocate for the Broad Creek Historic District. The Conservancy also owns 72 forested acres down the street from this proposed site called the Broad Creek Woods. Two of the great aspects of the Prince George's County Planning Board and planning staff is that, one, that they always engage the community in the discussion and design of planning strategies that will affect the future of their neighborhood. And two, the residents and businesses of the community are given a true sense of direction that the planning apparatus will indeed try to follow through on the strategies and goals they have developed with the community. That said, there is a real break of trust that is now happening between the planning staff and the Henson Creek Village community. The staff report for the Prologis proposed 130,000 square foot warehouse recommends the approval of this project. This staff report marginalizes all of the community input and faith that the two Henson Creek Village area studies done in 2006 and 2021. It insults all of the residents who gave of their time and views to produce these planning department reports, is disingenuous in making the community believe that the planning strategies, goals, and proposed community development that these reports represent actually mean something. And it ignores the basic question of how this proposed project is in conformance with this community's master plan. The acceptance of such a report by the planning board will have devastating results for any future planning department studies in this area. Who will believe what they say? Why would anyone want to participate in such an effort and give of their time if it is completely disregarded by the planning staff and perhaps by the planning board itself. That the planning staff believes that this project is more valid, has more community and economic benefit to the area than the goals and plans that the community is expecting and working towards is nothing short of bait and switch approach that asks that the community to forego the hopes and dreams that they worked on for a future area as outlined in these two studies for a proposed project that will certainly eradicate any incentives to produce the community the residents and businesses have worked towards. The proposed project by Prologis does nothing to further any of the goals produced by these two community-involved reports. In fact, it is the antithesis of the work of these reports. In the last 5 years, there have been much progress in the Hanson Creek South Potomac planning area. The Livingston Square development, which until recently was a rundown, depressing food and shopping project that had dwindling community support, was totally rebuilt into a vibrant food and health project with solid and growing community support. 2 new residential townhouse projects have been developed, one on the northwest corner of Oxon Hill and Livingston Roads, and the other two next to the Hanson Creek Trail. And the Adventist Healthcare is considering building a new hospital across from Livingston Square on the south side of Old Fort Road. The 2 townhouses and the new hospital may not become a reality if this Prologis proposed trucking warehouse is allowed to be built. Is this a trade-off that the planning board and planning staff feel is beneficial to the community? In the planning staff report on this proposed project, the staff noted that the district council's decision to zone the property I-1 either reflects the events that have occurred to render the relevant recommendations within the master plan no longer appropriate, or is evidence that the district council has not imposed and recommended zoning. As a result, conformance to the master plan use patterns is not required. I do not believe that it is the planning staff's prerogative to know what the district council is thinking or determine that the conformance to the master plan use is no longer appropriate, or is evidence that the district council has not imposed the recommended zoning. The planning staff should be recommending that these questions be brought before the district council so that they can speak to the issue before assuming that the staff can speak on behalf of the district council. Also, staff states that the proposed distribution warehouse will contribute to the overall existing mix of uses within the area surrounding the property, the subject property. Such a statement needs to be explained in much greater detail since so many of the surrounding community fail to see this link. Exactly where is the distribution warehouse noted in either of the major studies for the Hanson Creek Village area? How do large trucks going in and out of this area encourage residential and commercial businesses? Let me just end my comments with the following. 1, the staff report on this subject is woefully deficient in not looking at the goals from the Hanson Creek Village reports and showing how this proposed project fits in, bypassing any analysis of this intersection and solely focusing on this project as an isolated project with no community connection is a disservice to the planning board and to the community. And 2, on behalf of the Conservancy of Broad Creek, we're totally against this proposed project from being built at this location. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Leventhal. Appreciate that. We will move on to Dolores Holmes.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Dolores Holmes. I live at 314 Torres Drive in Fort Washington, Maryland.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
hold on one sec. You don't have to be on camera, but I don't see you, even though I do hear you.
Okay. Let me put my camera on.
And also, I want to make sure you were sworn in. Mr. Leventhal, I asked you that question. You were sworn in as well, right?
That is correct, and I was sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Leventhal. Ms. Holmes, I can see you now. Thank you. You were sworn in, correct?
I don't think so.
All right, let me swear you in real quick. We'll put 3 minutes on the clock as well. Please, if you may raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, consider yourself under oath and take it away. Introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Dolores Holmes, and I am a resident of Tantallion south, and I live at 314 Torres Drive in Fort Washington, Maryland, which is about, it's in within walking distance of the proposed logistic warehouse. I oppose the application to build this warehouse on Livingston Road for the following reasons. This proposal completely disregards the county's planning documents, including the 2006 Henson Creek Potomac Master Plan and the 2021 Henson Creek Village Area Study. It also poses significant risks to the safety and well-being of our community. The applicant did not notify the community of the upcoming hearing within 30 days. I live, as I said earlier, within walking distance, and I'm in this area all the time. I did not see any signs. Increased danger for pedestrians and cyclists. The introduction of 18-wheeler trucks into this small area, into an environment already identified as hazardous for pedestrians, and will contribute to increased traffic fatalities on Route 210, which is also known as the highway of death. So this is just another contributing factor to an already dangerous situation. This site is surrounded by commercial zones and shares a primary access road with the shops at Livingston Square, making it unsuitable for such a project. This developmental proposal causes increased environmental pollution. As a registered nurse, I know that this significantly contributes to respiratory disease, asthma, COPD, and heart attacks, cancer, and other stress-related illnesses. I urge the county to listen to the voices of the community and reject this application, because this does not increase our property values or add any value or anything to our community. And when you talk about walkable communities, that's supposed to be one of the emphasis for PG County. I ask you, how is this contributing to a walkable community when you have an 18-wheeler in your community? I urge you to oppose this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Appreciate you taking the time and your patience. Next, we have Ron Weiss. I believe, Mr. Weiss, you're representing the Indian Head Highway Area Action Council, so we'll give you up to 5 minutes on the clock, and you were sworn in, correct? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Appreciate it. Next, we have Dwayne Bowie with the Tantalum North Area Civic Association. Again, assuming you're representing the organization, we'll put 5 minutes on the clock, up to 5 minutes, and want to make sure you were sworn in as well.
Yes.
Okay. Take it away, sir. The floor is yours.
Sure. The Tantalum North Area Civic Association serves approximately 500 households in the Fort Washington, Maryland community, and we're opposed to the proposed infrastructure building by Prologis. Tantalum Area North Area Civic Association's primary concern is the additional traffic congestion that will occur on the 9,000 block of Livingston Road. The 9,000 block section of Livingston Road intersects with Maryland State Highway 210. Exiting southbound Maryland 210 onto the 9,000 block of Livingston Road is fairly limited, and especially with narrow 18-wheelers that need to make that turn, can be very careful in making that right turn and cannot turn until traffic is fully exited, both traffic crossing Maryland 210 from Palmer Road and traffic leaving the 9,000 block of Livingston Road. Prologis has proposed, I believe, to assist with funding widening the intersection of the Livingston Road, the intersection where Maryland 210 and the 9,000 block road is at. But upon a review of the proposal, the design does not adequately address 18-wheelers making that right turn from a southbound Maryland 210 onto the 9,000 block of Livingston Road. As 18-wheelers wait, they create additional congestion and dangers for those traveling already on the dangerous Maryland 210. 18-wheelers leaving the facility create a danger as they leave the 9,000 block of Livingston Road to go either north or southbound on Maryland 210 because it takes time for that truck to make that turn, which causes the light to turn quickly. Any of the trucks that come or go from the facility between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. and 3 in the morning and 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. in the evening could have a significant impact on the traffic that traverses Livingston Road. So Tantalian North Area Civic Association is against the proposed infrastructure. Thank you.
You're muted, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry. I was telling you, Miss Monroe, that you were muted, but I was on mute, so you couldn't hear me say that. We have next we have Miss Monroe, South County Environmental Justice Coalition. We'll put 5 minutes on the clock. And Miss Monroe, you were sworn in, correct?
Yes, I was.
Okay, take it away. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Oh, yeah, good afternoon, members of the Planning Board. My name is Patricia Monroe, and I live directly off of 210 and Livingston Road. I am not against new development, but would like to see development that increases the value of our homes, which this project will not do. My concerns are the additional air pollution, the noise, and the traffic congestion on 210 caused by 18-wheelers. These are direct threats to the health and well-being to the community. Some of the deadliest accidents have occurred between Kirby Hill Road and Oxon Hill Road, which these trucks will be traveling on. And now you want to add 18-wheelers to the mix on one of the deadliest roads in the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland is planning to change the intersection at 210 and Indian Head Highway right there at Palmer Road. This potential road change will have a major impact on the traffic flow on 210. MDOT approved the Prologis plan, but they did not take into consideration, I don't believe, that both of these projects are going to be starting at the construction at the same time. And in addition to that, they also, I don't think, took into consideration the changes that Prologis wants to make, because like I said, it just was not coordinated. We just can't see it. We've looked at it and we can't see it. When you're talking, that will create a 210, what I call the 210 nightmare, were the two housing developments slated to be built? And my question is, were the two houses developments slated to be built near the warehouse traffic considered in the studies? During the time the traffic study was taken was the fact that we were still in the midst of COVID and the traffic during that time was not quote unquote normal. I am asking MNCPPC, the planning board, to listen to the voices of the people in the community before approving businesses in residential areas that affect our daily lives. The traffic study shows a failure for the evening rush hour traffic, which actually starts around 2 o'clock on 210. This is when traffic is the heaviest. Even with improvements, the traffic study even took into consideration improvements in that area, and believe it or not, it still failed. I'm going by the report that was submitted to you all. The proposed emergency access from Livingston Road with an easement through the off-site adjacent property, what happens if there is an accident at that intersection or on 210 period? What happens to all of that traffic? When leaving the people out of the planning and approval process who live near new development that allows big money developers who do not live in this county to do whatever they wish in our communities, we must try to live with it. I urge you not to approve this application. Again, my name is Patricia Monroe, and I thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Monroe. Thank you for taking the time. Next, we have Deborah Young. Ms. Young, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Ms. Young, we'll put 3 minutes up on the clock for you. I don't see, you don't have to be on camera, but I don't see you, though I do hear you. And
I'm
we
on,
just-
I'm on the phone because I'm out. I'm not at home.
That's fine,
And
Ms.
I
Young,
have
no
not
problem.
been sworn.
You
I've
have
not
not
been
been sworn
sworn.
in. All right, if you
No.
could raise your right hand, and do you solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, consider yourself under oath, and we'll put 3
Thank-
minutes on the clock to help manage the time, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Deborah Young. I live at 808 Zero Estates Drive here in Fort Washington. I'm only a few miles from the site of the proposed development. And rather than to repeat what you've already heard, I would just simply like to say that I concur with all of the comments that have been made by the speakers that have spoken before me, because many of my comments have already been spoken. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Young. I really appreciate that, and thank you for your patience and for taking the time to make your voice heard.
Thank you.
Next, we have Janet Gingold, Sierra Club. Ms. Gingold, we'll put 5 minutes up on the clock. You were sworn in, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, we can't see. Oh, there you are. All right. Take it away. 5 minutes on the clock, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm Janet Gingold. I live at 13107 Whiteholm Drive in Upper Marlboro. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Prince George's County Sierra Club. Prince George's County Sierra Club opposes the proposal for building a warehouse in Henson Creek Village as described in application 423008 because it is not consistent with the village, with the master plan, and it involves new development in the floodplain. We oppose continued use of the prior zoning ordinance for new projects and urge the planning board to ensure that the development on this site be regulated using updated ordinances for woodland conservation, tree canopy coverage, and stream buffer widths, CB 2021 and 22, rather than the prior ordinances. The planning board has determined that that conformance to the master plan use patterns is not required because the district council zoned it for industrial use. No doubt much has changed since the 2006 approved Henson Creek's South Potomac Master Plan and Sectional Map Amendment. However, nearby property owners still envision a pedestrian-oriented village setting and hope to see new residents and retail establishments along with a new hospital nearby. A busy warehouse with heavy truck traffic is not consistent with this vision. What events have made the master plan no longer appropriate here? Why did the district council not impose the recommended zoning? If the prior use has rendered the property inappropriate for other uses, please say so. Because of a history of unkept promises and unrealized visions, if the planning board finds that the previous vision for the Henson Creek Transit Village is obsolete and this project is the best use for this land, the community needs the planning board to put in place requirements that will truly minimize adverse impacts and meet the needs of the community in decades to come, including mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and improving community resilience. Please use the new tree conservation and stream buffer ordinances and also use all possible leverage to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels. This is not just about the space that the building will occupy, but about the movement of trucks and potential air pollution, water pollution, as well as light and noise that will likely result from the operation of the warehouse. We have heard many concerns from residents and users of the Route 210 corridor about the impact of large trucks, especially diesel trucks, driving along the already congested roads that lead to the site, about time spent in traffic, about unsafe road conditions, about air and water quality, about light and noise, and about flooding. If this project is approved, conditions should be attached that ensure public benefits to help mitigate related greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution, that help improve climate resilience, and that compensate for other anticipated environmental and social costs. The conditions should apply not only to the builder of the warehouse, but also to the operator. We want to see a requirement for on-site solar energy and infrastructure to support electric vehicles. Rooftop solar could power local homes and businesses, as well as on-site chargers for electric trucks. Requiring on-site EV chargers will help to accelerate deployment of zero-emission vehicles, which will decrease the air pollution currently caused by diesel vehicles. Additional EV chargers installed at nearby commercial establishments could over time further decrease local transportation-related air pollution. Green infrastructure should be required to mitigate the impact of the acres of impervious surface. We appreciate the efforts to remediate the damage to the land caused by the prior operation of an auto salvage yard and the recommended condition for adding an additional half-acre of reforestation to the tree conservation plan. Nonetheless, we are concerned that this is not sufficient to protect sensitive areas downstream from a development that would put 140,000 square feet of impervious surface in a flood-prone area. The large area of impervious surfaces and expected new normal heavier rainfall will put greater volumes of stormwater into adjacent streams that run into environmentally sensitive Broad Creek. Increased runoff into streams that run into Broad Creek will likely include pollutants from the prior use, sediment during construction, and contamination from ongoing vehicular use once the warehouse is in operation. Please require design that controls polluted runoff and ensure that the tree conservation and stream buffer requirements for this property are at least as stringent as what would be required by CB 2021 and 22 of 2024. Light and noise from the facility will affect not only the humans, but wildlife in the adjacent Henson Creek Stream Valley Park. Care should be taken to design light systems for minimum impact on birds, insects, and other wildlife, inhabitants of the park, as well as people nearby. We want to make sure that the outcome for this property meets the standards for environmental protections that Prince George's County residents deserve. We urge you to include conditions that will ensure clean, renewable energy on site, EV infrastructure, mitigation of noise and light pollution, and control of any adverse effects of runoff. Thanks for doing all you can do to make this the best possible addition to the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Gingold. Much appreciated, as always. Next, we have Tamar Davis Brown. Ms. Brown? I'm not on mute. No, I'm actually speaking. Ms. Brown, we don't have Ms. Brown. Next, we have, I'll come back. Next, we have
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Brown just came on screen, but we can't hear you. Yeah.
Ms. Brown, I'm sorry. I see you now, but we don't hear you. Take your time. See if you can work out your technology. And if you need a minute to work out your technology, we can go to the next speaker, and maybe somebody on our staff can help you as well, but let's give you a minute now just in case. You're not on mute, so you're probably set for the wrong microphone, but I'm not an IT guy, so that may be bad advice.
You still can't hear. Tamara, check and make sure that your microphone has, that you're using your microphone on your computer.
Not yet.
You have to click on microphone. You'll get a drop-down menu and it says turn on microphone. Do you see that, Tamara?
I'll tell you what, Ms. Brown, let's do this. Let's have somebody from our staff work with you, hopefully, and you can just call in, okay? And if we don't need to see you, we can just hear you, okay? I think the call-in number is actually on the, does she have the call-in number, or we put that in the chat, or is there a way to get that to her? I want to make sure we hear her voice.
Yes, Chair, she should have the number. It's on the same link, the same email that the link was provided.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. So Ms. Brown, look at the email you got, find the caller number, go ahead and call in. We'll go to the next speaker, but we will not forget you. We'll make sure that that you get to testify, okay? All right, so moving on, we have Robin Waller with Fort Washington Forward. No, Ms. Waller? Okay, I'll check back again later. Next, we have Joyce Perkinson with Tantalian North Area Civic Association. Ms. Perkinson? All right, let me note that again. We need to come back to you. And next, we have Stacy Hartwell with the NAACP. Ms. Hartwell, I do see you. You are on mute. Now you're off mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. And you were sworn in.
Yes, I was sworn in earlier.
Okay. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock, Ms. Hartwell, since you're representing the NAACP. And if you could introduce yourself for the record. Thank you for your patience, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Stacy Hartwell. I also have submitted complimentary written testimony, and I just want to say that I echo and adopt prior opposing comments and appreciate Commissioner William Dorner's comments on solar EV and other renewable considerations. My comments address social and environmental justice. As the former state chair of the NAACP Maryland State Conference Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, I have a comprehensive view of the environmental challenges across our state. We commissioned a discovery report available on our website identifying the most environmentally overburdened communities. Sadly, the Oxon Hill, Fort Washington area ranks among the top 10 most polluted in Maryland and is in the 95th percentile on the Maryland Department of Environment's Environmental Justice Screening Tool, which aggregates cumulative environmental impacts. This tool helps MDE assess if projects like the proposed Prologis warehouse align with state climate goals, environmental laws, and the intent of the White House's Justice 40 initiative to help mitigate the ravages of environmental racism. This neighborhood, already overburdened by pollution, should be a priority for relief, not more harmful development that erodes our health, quality of life, and wealth. Property values decline, banks deny home improvement loans, and generational wealth is stripped from our children. Even more disturbing, and this is important for future projects that are proposed, Prologis warehouses are predominantly placed in Black and Brown communities like Baltimore, Laurel, Jessup, Cheverly, none along the predominantly white 270 Rockville, Frederick corridor. These warehouses create diesel death zones, bringing pollution, traffic, soil contamination, and stormwater runoff, and even worse. Prince George's County already struggles with poor air quality, receiving an F from the American Lung Association. Baltimore leads in air quality-related deaths and breast cancer rates nationwide. Adding another warehouse would intensify these environmental crises, creating a warehouse wasteland of heat islands and pollution. Prologis' so-called community benefits, these are low-wage jobs, and I think they do offer a turkey. Offering, these are like an insult, and they kind of smack of colonialism, offering trinkets to steal our sovereign right to clean air, land, and water. The jobs they offer don't even pay enough to live in Fort Washington, and their workforce development programs exclude middle and executive management roles. Your board must make decisions that protect overburdened communities like ours. We implore you to apply the precautionary principle as a common sense approach to help save our community and do no further harm. We urge you to reject the Prologis proposal and support smart, resilient development that fosters a clean, green, regenerative economy and healthy future for all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hartwell. Thank you very much. Next, we have, let me go back just to check if we have Ms. Brown. Are you on the line? No answer yet, but we'll keep coming back to you. And we don't have Robin Waller. We don't have Joyce Perkinson. We do have, I did see him, Mr. Owens. David Owens, you there?
I am.
Okay. We don't see you, but we do hear. Oh, now we see you too.
There I am.
We can
There
see
I am.
you and hear you. And you were sworn in, correct, Mr. Owens?
I was sworn in, and in the spirit of Mr. Gerardo's one name, you can call me Agitator.
Mr. Agitator, we're going to put 5 minutes up on the clock. You are, I assume, representing Fort Washington Forward, correct?
I am a board member. I'm an organizational officer, Fort Washington Forward. I live at 13312 Diggs Terrace, Fort Washington, Maryland. So yes, I'm representing them today. Yeah.
Floor is yours.
So this warehouse, well, good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Afternoon already. Wow. This warehouse project does not conform with the Henson Creek South Potomac Master Plan. Specifically, the project brings 18-wheeler trucks to Livingston Road, inhibiting several parts of the current master plan, such as a pedestrian-oriented Main Street, on-street parking, and traffic calming measures. Furthermore, the proposal contradicts the District Council's update to the master plan that was completed just 18 months ago. In that update, 6 properties were rezoned, and the master plan was reworded to say, quote, a modern healthcare facility is envisioned to catalyze future commercial and residential development along the Main Street, end quote. Simply put, this warehouse project is the antithesis of the master plan's vision. This proposal also threatens the safety of everybody. The 2021 Henson Creek Village Area Study stated the following about Livingston Road, quote, opportunities for pedestrians are limited in this area. Livingston Road sidewalks are of minimum width in poor condition. Buffers between the roadway and sidewalks are intermittent, and there are no designated spaces in the street for cyclists. There are significant barriers to walking, biking, micromobility, and transit, end quote. Allowing large and/or 18-wheeler trucks into this environment is a reckless decision and contradicts the master plan. The aforementioned staff report is justifying the project by stating the warehouse does not front Livingston Road and thus cannot control the design of Livingston Road. I would agree with previous speakers. This analysis is woefully superficial. 18-wheeler trucks on Livingston Road will prevent future on-street parking and traffic calming measures, which are called for in the master plan. Thus, this development proposal contradicts the Henson Creek South Potomac master plan. The bottom line here is either the master plan is wrong or the zoning and/or subsequent proposal is flawed. If the master plan is wrong, then we need to delay this case until the district council weighs in. If the master plan is right, then the applicant's use contradicts the master plan. If you notice, the applicant has focused all of its efforts today on the site, as if it's disconnected from Livingston Road, and the 18-wheeler trucks that come with it are just an act of God that they can't control. They don't want you to know there are more than 20 commercial zones along Livingston Road, the shops at Livingston Square, and an 80-unit residential townhouse development that has already been approved. It is an insidious effort to deceive the planning board, and it's insulting to residents. The suggestion that solar panels and green roofs are a value add is not enough. This applicant's effort to shoehorn this warehouse into this narrow area sends a clear signal that it does not care about the county's short-term or long-term development vision. We are asking that the planning board and the district council push back. Fort Washington Forward recommends that this application be denied because it does not conform to the master plan, it's a safety risk, and it voids everything the district council just approved 18 months ago. We also recommend the planning board and district council continue rezoning the Henson Creek Transit Village as it did 18 months ago, ensuring both the short-term and long-term goals of community development are met in Fort Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Appreciate it. Next, we have Herbert Jones, Tantalian North Area Civic Association. Mr. Jones, you're also an officer of the organization, representing the
correct.
organization. We'll put
That
you,
is correct.
we'll put up to 5 minutes on there if you need that much time. I assume you were sworn in as well, correct?
That is correct. Can you
Okay,
hear
Mr.
me?
Jones. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay.
Take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, concerned citizens, and staff. Again, my name is Herbert Jones. I'm president of the Tallinn North Area Civic Association, and I'm pleased to relay comments on behalf of the 500 homeowners that I represent. I travel up and down Livingston Road almost each and every day. And I hate to say, and I don't want to be contradictory, but I was definitely looking for that signage in terms of the notification on August 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I didn't see anything. I actually drove up to the gate several times because I again, go up and down that roadway almost every day. That's a minor issue, but it goes to public awareness and transparency. My wife and I moved into this beautiful community in 2018 and have enjoyed our community and neighborhood immensely. However, most recently, our community has been under siege with development that does nothing to enhance our home and property values. By way of background, the Peterson Group had proposed to build a 130,000 square foot storage facility off of Livingston Road. As I stated and mentioned earlier, Pepco, and it seems to be an ongoing thing, Livingston Road. Everyone likes Livingston Road for whatever reason. Pepco had proposed a lithium-ion battery storage facility on Livingston Road, no more than 150 yards from a daycare center, 200 yards from residential homes. We were able to convince Pepco to relocate. So these are similar themes. I don't think Prologis necessarily is a bad company, but we want them to consider a relocation, maybe assistance from the county as well, because the current site, in terms of proximity to residential homes, those things that have already been said, is just not in the public interest. The issue of air quality that was mentioned by Stacy, noise, the impact of overall quality of life is going to be significant. I'm not a traffic engineer or environmental expert, but you really don't have to be if you kind of know about this particular community. It is just so obvious. Additionally, the 145,000 square foot warehouse with 17 bays, 18 wheelers, and concentrated first source emissions seems not to be in the public interest. Lack of appropriate investment in current infrastructure and not adhering to both the 2035 Henson Creek Comprehensive Plan makes this project not in the public interest and needs to be considered for another more appropriate site. The environmental impact on the community would be substantial. Traffic congestion, as already been said, large trucks traveling on 210. Livingston Road is not designed to take the load-bearing weight of 18-wheelers. The entire Titania community travels up and down Livingston Road on a daily basis. Let me just say very quickly and just move to in closing. We must do a better job as a county in taking into account the cumulative impacts of projects in and around us. And as was previously said, it's important as we envision our community for the future, for our kids, etc., that we have a livable, walkable community that makes sense. I don't necessarily think Prologis is a bad company. They seem to be well managed, etc. And we're ready to assist them in seeking out alternative location and sites for this project. To this point, that we not support this particular proposal at this particular time on this particular site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate that. Next, we have actually Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown, say something.
Yes,
Hey.
Yes, I'm here. I'm calling in.
Perfect, Ms. Brown. So you were sworn in, correct?
Yes, I was.
Okay, then we'll put 3 minutes up on the clock, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. My name for the record, Tamara Davis Brown. I am a member of the Maryland 10 Traffic Safety Committee. However, my testimony this afternoon is not on behalf of that committee, but as an individual that is concerned about traffic safety. So I want to ditto particularly the comments of Mr. Leventhal, Mr. Owens, Ms. Stacy Hartwell, and many others. And I'm going to focus my testimony solely on transportation issues. The staff report indicated that there would be improvements of existing roadways, but nowhere in the staff report did it speak to improving either Livingston Road, Palmer Road, or Old Fort Road, which are the two exit roadways for Prologis traffic from its 18-wheelers to access the property on Taylor Road. As many people have already spoken and said, it's going to be very difficult for the 18-wheelers to navigate in and along Livingston Road and getting onto Livingston Road, either from Old Fort Road or from Palmer/Livingston Road. The queue now for traffic, cars during the day, this is daytime traffic, not even during rush hour traffic, queues up past Hover Malleys to almost to the Harley Davidson, where the Taylor Road intersection begins. Coming from Old Fort Road, the queue is past the Livingston Square Shopping Center up to Caddy Road or Caddy Road. So as we can see already during daytime traffic, because we have a lot of retirees that live here in the county and they are out and about in daytime traffic. So I'd like for one of the recommendations for the condition, if there are any approvals, that the operation be limited from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. And it sounds ridiculous, but if you've been in this area and you've driven either during rush hour or during daytime traffic, you see the queues up. And there's just, unless there is some substantial way to improve Livingston Road, and I don't see that being possible because of the existing commercial development, it will only, the 18-wheelers will only exacerbate the problem. Maryland 210 is tagged as the deadliest highway in Maryland, if not on the East Coast, with over 90 deaths along that stretch of highway. We are very concerned as a committee, safety committee, of trying to help improve the conditions along 210, and we think only the 18-wheelers will continue to exacerbate and cause additional fatalities along that stretch of roadway. Therefore, I'm personally asking that this application be denied. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm glad we were able to get you on the phone. I think that Robin Waller may be trying to call in. Do we have Robin Waller? All right, we'll come back to you. Next, we have Harriet Thomas Richmond. Ms. Thomas Richmond?
Yes, sorry about that. I think I should be visual. Yes, I am. All right, I have been
visible and
sworn in.
audible. You have been sworn in. Okay, we'll put 3 minutes up on the clock and introduce
you.
yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Harriet Richmond. I live at 9423 Sandy Creek Road in Fort Washington. It is the Broad Creek Estates. I'm right off of Fort Foote Road South. So I can't speak for the whole, but I want to echo the same concerns that everyone else mentioned, but with a caveat. I feel like I have boots on the ground experience on how, for me, after reviewing the proposal, that the plan doesn't do enough to address all the myriad of issues that have been brought up, and particularly the traffic. We had a delegate, Woods would say, we had a memorial services for those families who lost their loved ones. And since, as someone said, we have the greatest fatality throughout the county, if not the state. We had a memorial services for those grievous families. We had 91 since 2007. And it would be just a slap in the face. I mean, it was nice. The memorial service was nice, but it doesn't address the issue of our fatalities. And it would be just like stomping on those loved ones' graves if we don't really come up with better solutions on how we're going to provide more safety on 210. Those 18-wheelers, I understand you're trying to be pedestrian friendly, but there is a a local driving range that a lot of people who can't afford Top Golf go to shoot their balls. We have a cute little Hoover Mills that is always loaded with young people trying to get their ice cream. I don't know how an 18-wheeler going to come through there and not create issues. I even have to back up. We talk about medical access, and you're trying to do things to provide more medical facilities for our aging population. And by the way, in Fort Washington, people 60 and above, we represent at least a quarter of the population in Fort Washington of people who 60 and above. And when I'm coming from the historical Broad Creek area, I even have to back up to let the bus swing. So what the plan does not cover is everything outside the site, which I think is kind of negligent. I'm so sorry, planning board. I know you try to do the best you can, but I think you need to go past just the little site and really take a look at how are those 18-wheelers really going to turn? It can't turn without causing problems. And if we have a medical emergency, particularly where I live, I will never be able to get to the hospital the 18-wheelers away, because there is no way that there's no room for people to move to the side and allow a medical vehicle to go around it and get back onto the road to get me to the hospital. So I'm just really want the board to deny this request. Prologis, I saw some of your buildings, they're cute for other clients. Ours is not so cute, but it looks like you could provide some cuteness. And I also want to talk about the William Dunn and his concerns about the scream. And I worry that how frequently will you really keep up that screen? Because I bike ride on that creek road and it was disgusting. Now we just did efforts to clean it up and make it look nice, but how regularly is your clients or your tenants are going to maintain and make sure that there's no more additional pollution? And I think that's it. And I like what Stacy Hartwell said too. We represent at least 61% of the Black population in Prince George's County. I have friends who die from cancer on a regular now. And it's all because we don't do anything to our environment to ensure our safety medically wise. We just let people pollute us and kill us off. I know that's what y'all trying to do, kill off African Americans, but we're here to stay. So think about something else. I implore the board, at least consider the small people who live in Prince George's County and our concerns about our health, our well-being, our safety. Please think of someplace else that you can put this particular facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richmond. Next we have, I'm sorry, do we have Robin Waller? Ms. Waller, did you jump on?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you,
Yes.
excellent. You were sworn in, Ms. Waller?
I was not.
Okay, let me swear you in real quick. Please raise your right hand.
Yes, I
Do you
am.
solemnly swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Consider yourself under oath. I'm going to put 3 minutes up on the clock, and the floor is yours.
Okay. I just simply want to first say thank you for allowing us to speak on this topic. I am concerned about notice for the Prologis warehouse. We met a few neighbors this past weekend that live on Broadview, which is within 1,000 feet of the warehouse behind Henson Creek. I spoke with Mr. James and Mr. Barrera, who both were not aware of the warehouse and did not acknowledge having notice, even in writing. Their addresses are 9200, and Mr. Barahona, I'm sorry, is 9106. Mr. Barahona had a translator with him at that time, which I think was his nephew. But I'm also concerned that prior to just a few days ago, the sign was not visible, even though we knew about the sign because I am Vice President of Fort Washington Forward, and we do a lot of research. This sign wasn't visible, generally speaking, for some time. Maybe it fell over, I'm not sure. But for those two reasons, I'm concerned about notice, and I just want to echo what everyone else has said on the call today, and that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Waller. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Next, Joyce Perkinson, by any chance? Did Joyce Perkinson pop on? No? Okay. Next, we have James Lawson and then Mary Franklin. Mr. Lawson, you've been patient with us. You were sworn in, correct, sir?
Oh, yes, I was.
Okay, I'll put 3 minutes up on the clock and take it away. The floor is yours.
My name is James Lawson. I lived at 2109 South Oliva Court, Accokeek, for 30 years. As a longtime resident and commuter, I strongly oppose Prologis' proposal to build a warehouse in Henderson Creek Village, as described in application 4-23008. When a large project is approved and planned, we must consider the road and traffic. Careful planning is not just necessary, it is imperative to ensure that the additional traffic generated will not overburden the existing roads, as with the intersection of Route 210 and Livingston Road, where approximately 40 to 80,000 cars pass through every day. The urgency of this situation cannot be overstated, and immediate action is required. Over the past 30 years, I, along with many other commuters, have experienced the daily struggle of navigating the congested Highway 210 to travel to work in Fairfax, DC, or other parts of the DMV. Cars that use Highway 210 every day must all pass the intersection of 210 and Livingston Road/Palmer Road. There is no realistic bypass of this intersection. The proposed warehouse would only exacerbate this already challenging situation and the frustration of dealing with this traffic. The existing roads are not designed for tractor trailers. Every day during the morning and evening rush hour on weekends, there's a traffic bottleneck at the intersection of Route 210 and Livingston Road, as documented by the MDOT and 210 Safety Committee. There are large numbers of accidents in this area. The approval of the warehouse would only escalate these numbers, putting the safety of all commuters at a greater risk. Approving the Henderson Creek warehouse will not just cause traffic chaos at Route 210 and the Livingston Road intersection, but also raise serious safety concerns. The Prologis warehouse sole purpose is to support a fleet of 18 wheelers 24 hours a day. If this project is approved, the mix of vehicles traveling the Beltway on Livingston Road will change, leading to potential accidents and safety hazards. It's difficult for a tractor trailer to turn left off Livingston Road onto northbound Highway 210 and stay in one of the two turning lanes, posing a significant safety risk to all commuters. The potential negative impact on our community and daily lives cannot be ignored. The Maryland Department of Transportation has identified this section of Highway 210 for improvement. The Maryland Department of Transportation, there's a plan to improve this section of road, but I can find no evidence that this project will be funded and constructed anytime soon. Transportation Secretary Paul Winifred said drilling funds have created a $1.3 billion gap in transportation funding, forcing a deferral of projects across the state. Do not approve this project. If you allow it to go forward, your decision will significantly increase accidents and probably some loss of life at this intersection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Finally, we have Mary Franklin. Ms. Franklin, are you on the line?
I am.
Okay. We can't see you, but we can hear you. You don't need to come on the camera. And were you sworn in, Ms. Franklin?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll put 3 minutes on the clock and take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay. I have the same concerns as the previous people who have spoken. Ms. Holmes, Mr. Wise, Mr. Bowie, Ms. Monroe, Ms. Young, Delegate Woods. I'm very concerned about this project in our area. My address is 815 Cerro Pine Lane, Fort Washington. I echo everything everybody said, and I agree with the congestion, the pollution, the lack of infrastructure to bring in 18 wheelers going into a warehouse on a small road that's used by the residents here every day going to and from work. and also doing their shopping. And especially the area up in Livingston Square, if we bring all these large trucks in here, then people are not going to be able to get to the Giants or the other facilities, the dental clinic or the restaurants that's in that area. It's just going to cause even more and more congestion. The project talked a lot about the building and cleaning up the land, but they're not talking about the infrastructure around entering and exiting that area. I strongly oppose this project.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Franklin. Is there anyone else on the list that I missed? Okay. Lot of information, a lot to think about. I appreciate everyone taking the time to come forward and speak. So what I want to do now is turn back to, well, first of all, there may be questions from commissioners toward either the applicant or staff based on some of the questions and comments that we have heard. So I'd like to start with the commissioners to direct questions to staff or applicant. We will then give the applicant the final word, a chance for rebuttal and close, that is. And then it's to us for any deliberation. But commissioners, questions you may have based on all the powerful testimony that we heard, questions that you may have for staff or applicant.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Washington, well, let me begin by first thanking all community members for your participation and your engagement this afternoon. And I agree with the chairman wholeheartedly. A lot of information shared. And I do have some questions, and they are, I'll state them as needing more information or clarity. And I believe that they were thematic in a lot of the testimony that we heard from opposition. So I will just go down kind of some of my summary notes, because I was taking lots of notes. If you all saw me flipping through my legal pad, I wanted to make sure I was capturing all of what was being stated. So number one, certainly heard a lot about the large trucks, the movements, 210 Livingston Road. So I need somebody to help me, and apparently all these citizens who came out to testify, just how these large truck movements are going to take place. You know, I heard, traffic congestion. There were implications with regards to an emergency vehicle or EMS being able to access let's see, I believe Miss Richmond, I believe, and forgive me if I attached the wrong name to the comment, as well as safety. I would just like to understand from the applicant's standpoint how they envision that happening, and certainly having heard the same testimony we heard this morning. So that's number one. Number two, and while certainly outside of the scope perhaps of this hearing, I would like the representative from Prologis to comment on Ms. Hartwell's testimony as it relates to social and environmental justice issues. And one thing struck me in particular was her comment with regards to Prologis only building these facilities in Black and Brown communities. So I would like to know, quite frankly, if that is a statement of fact. If in fact it is, then why, and or not or, but and what other areas have been considered as it relates to location and placement of your facilities. Third, conformity to the master plan. I know that both staff and the applicant did have some comments leading into the citizen testimony with regards to non-conformity, or why it did not need to conform to the master plan. But I think a more detailed and perhaps a layman's explanation as to why it does, why it doesn't, conform to the master plan should be articulated. Certainly for me, but again, I gleaned that from the testimony from the community. And then finally, Delegate Woods in her comments asked pretty explicitly about what assurances would the applicant provide to the community if in fact this facility is, if it in fact does move forward. You know, she was very clear in her not only expressed desire as the representative for this area, but you know, the community and the citizens are moving towards, or they are certainly supportive, as I think we all are as citizens of the county, wanting to ensure that, you know, whatever is being done in our communities, especially those that we live in, are for the betterment of the community. And again, it seemed to be the sense of the opposition testimony that if in fact the applicant believes that they are doing said benefits, it certainly is not clear to the citizens. And I can honestly say it has not been made that clear to me. So I'll just start there, Mr. Chairman. So those were kind of my summary notes based on, again, and thanking everyone who came out to testify today.
Those are excellent. Thank you. So my take on this, Commissioner Washington, is most of these are questions for the applicant. Though staff may have some thoughts or reactions to some of these too. But let's begin with the applicant, Commissioner Washington, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I've got a couple other things to tie into. And I think.
Hold on one sec, Commissioner Dorner. I'm wondering, you know, actually, let's follow your lead. Let's get all the questions out from all the commissioners, because there may be some overlaps, and then we'll turn it over to the applicant and staff. So go ahead, Commissioner Dorner.
Yeah, some of my stuff is actually related to what Commissioner Washington had raised, so it might be helpful to just kind of put everything together in some ways. So she mentioned the master plan, and I think this actually might go more towards Mr. Warner in terms of helping us understand how are we making the decision today? So what's the criteria for approval or for denial? Because there have been statements about how this doesn't conform to the master plan. So I want to know, how do we reconcile the master plan's intent and then the district council's approval of the countywide SMA that reclassified the property and their intention about the zoning of it, because those are in conflict, and it's been raised by, it's mentioned some in the staff report, but it's also been raised here, and I would just like to have a little more clarity on that. And then I have mostly questions on environmental aspects of the plan. One of the things that I was wondering about that was raised when the Sierra Club had testified was on the woodland conservation requirement. And this is kind of tied to the master plan, in the sense that when I'm thinking about how some things apply from the master plan, some things apply from the SMA, and like, how do we actually reconcile all of that? Because we've had changes in the land use regulations that we have. One of the things that's changed recently has been the woodland conservation requirements. So when are we supposed to adopt new things, and when are we not? Is kind of my simple question of how I think through that, because we're using net area instead of gross area in calculating the woodland conservation requirements. Would we be able to go to the stricter sense of that for this case, or should we go to that stricter sense? Like, do we have any discretion within there? Some of the things I don't know if it's appropriate at this time to raise them, but I'll mention it since it came up in the testimony, is more of business operations that might be mandated or controlled by DPI in terms of the limiting of the hours of operation, when trucks should be coming in and out of there. But then also for the applicant related to that, something that I was thinking about with this site, particularly with the conceptual site plan, is all the area that would be pointing to the west, that would be the woodland area that's being restored. What kind of assurance do you have that lines aren't going to be pointed in that direction? That actually goes towards some of the houses and other stuff over there. So reducing the light pollution. If you have, I think Mr. Haller, a lot of times on your projects, you'll have like lamps or lights that will go downward, and you don't have any sort of pollution going upward into the night sky. So I'm just wondering what's going to be happening on that. And if there's kind of hours of operations of the lights, so that way if there aren't trucks going in there, that they're not going to be pointing in the stream valley and disrupting like the vegetation and wildlife and everything else that would be over there. And then one of the other things related to environmental stuff is I want to know a little bit more about the runoff in that area, because we've got to the west, we've got Henson Creek. To the south, we have Hunter's Mill Branch that's right there. Maybe it was my fault for not asking it earlier, but I'm not really clear in terms of how that's going to be treated in the process of all this. And I want to know, like, are there treatments that are going to be on the side of the buildings to clean the water before it actually gets onto the pavement, when it gets onto the pavement, but before it gets to the actual like runoff in there, particularly encroaching on like the 75-foot setbacks from the waterways? Is it going to be treated additionally in there so that way we can be assured that there's not going to be pollutants of certain levels or any kinds kind of making it into the stream? Because if it gets down to Hunter's Mill Branch running south, it's just going to pour right into to Henson Creek right there. So I want to have a little bit more sort of flavor around that. And I think part of my sort of reaction to some of the more environmental stuff and asking these questions a little bit more now is that I was just generally dissatisfied with the answer about the solar and the roof. I know it was given. I know that I understand what was said, but it just didn't strike me as very much in the way of things. Maybe paint's not cheap, but I think there could also be other kind of ways of doing that. And that just got me thinking about other parts of the project and sort of the environmental sensitivity. So I'll stop there and see if Commissioner Bailey has anything else to add.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I did have some comments and questions, mostly associated with the questions that have already been asked regarding the conformity to the master plan, and also how this site handles impact emergency transportation in that area. And are there any benefits to the community having this item within the community? So most of the questions I wanted to ask have already been asked by my colleagues, so I'm awaiting the response to those questions. And if I have additional questions, I will ask to speak again.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bailey. Similarly, my colleagues asked a number of the questions that I have. A few additional ones that I want. Some of this is more directed towards staff than the applicant, but we hear a lot around the amount of traffic that a proposed project could generate. I'm curious about how we factor in the type of vehicle rather than the number of vehicles in a situation like this, and how capacity related to type of vehicle versus number of vehicles, because that's a lot of what I heard from the community. And to Commissioner Dorner's point, a lot of what I want to make sure that I have clarity about, we have clarity about, but even the community has clarity about is what is pertinent for us. We are in a quasi-judicial role, and we have to be very clear about, because like it or not, the property owner has rights. And so, so what is appropriate, what is pertinent for us to be considering at a case like this? And I think it's going to be helpful for staff, council to be clear with us to help frame this for us. So, for instance, as a general rule, as I've been advised, preliminary plan addresses public health, welfare, and safety, which is a bunch of the concerns that we've heard. I'm looking at you, Ms. Hartwell, specifically, right? But those are general terms, and how do we consider that in our quasi-judicial role? What data do we consider when we look at that? There's no doubt that some of these uses can have some measure of negative environmental impact. Now, how do we factor that in when there's a broader environmental justice issue? Absolutely, we are all sensitive to that and trying to figure out how to navigate that. And we have a specific project here, and part of my complexity around this, I wouldn't quite say ambivalence, is that in many ways, this project is proposing to clean up a pretty toxic site. So that there's some real benefit to that. And how do we factor that in as well? So my questions, again, related to what's before us is perhaps more for council, questions about the type of vehicles versus the volume of vehicles. Maybe that's Ms. Gupta or others. So that's a bit of a nuance to some of the other questions that we've had. Commissioners, anything else? And Ms. Hartwell, as tempting as it is, I have to beg you to don't use the chat for content. We only use it for tech support. Because you're having great thoughts and comments, but we have a process.
I didn't know.
So. No worries. That's fine.
Okay, I won't do it anymore. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done it.
No, it's okay. But you did it twice, and both of them were really helpful. So, but you got to stop now.
I will stop.
Thank you, ma'am. Commissioners, anything else we want to add to the questions that we're going to direct towards staff and applicants? All right, so I am also mindful of the time. We've been going for a little over 3 hours, and I imagine we're going to hear a lot from staff and a lot from the applicants as well. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful to take about a 10-minute break right now.
10-minute would be helpful, yes.
Okay, so it's 1:07. Let's take a little, dare I say, a little bit longer than that. Let's take a 15-minute break. We'll come back or we'll split the difference, 13-minute break. We'll come back at 1:20.
That sounds good.
Okay. See you all in 13 minutes.
We have a little bit different process for addressing adequacy requirements, traffic being one of them. And in the past, under the prior, before the new ordinance took effect, the staff report did discuss traffic adequacy and the conditions for road improvements and whatnot were contained in the staff report. And so if somebody looks at the staff report and doesn't see a condition related to a road improvement, for example, then they question whether it was addressed or not. But as you know, under the new ordinance, we're required to submit an application for a certificate of adequacy that reviews the site not only for the adequacy of traffic, but other public facilities as well. And so that was done in this case. And so as a result of that, we did do a traffic analysis. Mr. Lenhart did a traffic analysis, and the certificate of adequacy was approved and is in your backup. And there is a road improvement associated with the development of this site at the intersection of Highway and Livingston Road. I'm not sure who that is, but I want to ask
Mr. Haller. We've got feedback from somebody. Hold on one sec. If everyone who's not speaking can mute, please. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Haller. Please continue.
And so what I would like to do is call Mr. Lenhart and allow him to explain to you the improvement that has been required and address some of the other traffic concerns that were raised, particularly about the ability of the roads to accommodate trucks that may come to this site. So if I could ask Mr. Lenhart to address the board, and then I'll follow back up on some of the other issues.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. Michael Lenhart with Lenhart Traffic Consulting. I'll just go through a few items in response to some things I heard in the testimony, and then happy to also answer any other questions you might have. One of the community people testified that the traffic counts were conducted when COVID was in session and had impacts on the traffic. That in fact is not accurate. Our traffic counts were conducted in April of 2023, which is well after traffic had recovered from COVID impacts. The traffic study was scoped with park and planning staff and included State Highway, DPI, and DBWT in those conversations. The traffic study was conducted in accordance with the Transportation Review Guidelines. This site is zoned industrial, which allows for this exact type of use. The Master Plan of Transportation is developed based upon the various property zones and how each of those zones would impact traffic on the roads. Master Plan of Transportation establishes Livingston Road as a collector road, 4-lane collector road. Livingston Road between between 210 at Palmer and Oxon Hill is built to a 4-lane collector standard. The traffic study showed that our site access and Taylor Acres out to Livingston and the intersection at Livingston is operating at adequate levels of service. The traffic study did show that the intersection of Route 210 at Livingston and Palmer is failing. We calculated this site's impact to the intersection. The requirements for mitigation is that you have to mitigate at least 150% of the site's impact. And the improvement that we have identified and that has been approved by staff and by State Highway actually mitigates 456% of the site's impact. So well in excess of the requirements. We are entering into design plan preparation at this time. We'll be coordinating with State Highway on the access improvement plans. We heard a number of people testify about the southbound right turn lane from Route 210 onto Livingston, and that some observations that trucks may be having a tough time making that turn. We're going to be through the design process with the state, looking at that, seeing if there's improvements that can be made to that to improve access for trucks. And if that's an existing issue, Livingston Road is used by trucks today, trucks and buses to serve adjacent uses and beyond. And so that's an existing situation that we're going to work with the state to try to improve. As someone testified, there are sidewalks along both sides of Livingston Road today. It's built to a collector standard, including sidewalks. Those sidewalks, some of them are older sidewalks and don't meet the current 5-foot standards. However, they do allow for pedestrian activity and connections. Typically, they get repaired and replaced over time. And I would expect that to happen, but there is connectivity out there that does allow for access.
Mr. Lenhart, Mr. Hallerford, sorry, I have a question for Mr. Lenhart.
Absolutely.
So do you help me to understand, and my colleagues as well, when you do these kinds of studies, do you differentiate between type of vehicle? So how do you factor in on the traffic counts and things like that, 18-wheelers? Or is that just tends to be not relevant for these things from your?
Well, I would preface that by saying I've been doing this work for 24 years in the county. And for industrial uses like this, we have done this study like we always do this study. It's the majority of the traffic generated by this is employee trips during the peak periods. There is truck traffic that's associated with it. It's not the majority of the traffic. And so the methodologies that are used do anticipate for normal distribution of trips. And as you get out, particularly on the road network, this would add traffic. It would add trucks. It does not substantially change the overall distribution of traffic. And the traffic study shows that it does pass the required guidelines. The mitigation mitigates 4.5 times the site's impact. And we do have approvals from your staff and from State Highway on that mitigation.
Oh, I appreciate that, and there's no doubt about your expertise in this as well. I mean, what strikes me as different though is, and how if at all you factor this in, is that this isn't just any collector road, right? This is a collector road, which is a problem a bit, but it's a collector road that's that's running through a planned high pedestrian impact area?
Well, and one of the Fort Washington Forward's memos talked about recent recommendation to restripe the roadway as one lane each direction with a center turn lane and bike lanes. We did look at that as well, and even with that change, if that is in fact incorporated, Livingston Road itself would still operate within acceptable levels and adequacy standards. So the approval of this application meets the current transportation guidelines. It would also not frustrate the ability for any future vision for Livingston Road.
Thank you. Mr. Haller.
Yeah, and I would note briefly that the recommendation that is in the 2021 study that was referenced to restripe or reconfigure Livingston Road was based upon a finding that Livingston Road carries much less traffic than what a 4-lane road is typically designed to accommodate. And what it says in that study is it presents an opportunity for the county to restripe it, to make it, to provide either on-street parking or bike lanes or whatnot. So I asked Mr. Lenhart to look at, well, what if they did that? What if the county elected to do that, as the study suggests might be beneficial? And he said that, and there's a report in the record that is included in the backup that we submitted that indicates that if that is done, it would not, that the trucks that would come to this site would not impede the ability of the county to implement that recommendation. So whether it's in the existing condition of a 4-lane road, or whether it is reconfigured to be 2 lanes in each direction with parking or bike lanes on the side, either way, they accommodate the proposed traffic that would be generated by this site.
But I'm a bit confused, because what you're talking about is not just adequacy then at intersections, for example, but you're talking about the width of the road, which is I mean, that actually is before us, because that's a master plan conformance issue, right?
Well, again, the road is dedicated to its ultimate master plan width, and it's improved to 4 lanes. What one of the comments that was made in Mr. Owen's letter was that approving this site would frustrate the recommendation of the sector plan to reconfigure the lanes. And what Mr. Lenhart has stated is that the use of this site as proposed will not affect the ability to reconfigure the lanes should the county elect to do it. It was identified as something that the county would implement if it deemed it to be advisable. It's not something that an applicant can or would be able to implement.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
It is my understanding, I'm Michael Leventhal. It is my
understanding.
understanding.
Wait, Mr. Leventhal, I'm sorry. Just hold on one sec, because we're at this point, we're keeping questions from commissioners to the applicants.
I just want to clarify that this section of Livingston Road is state-owned, not county-owned.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Leventhal. All right, so other questions for Mr. Lenhart? Otherwise, we'll go back to Mr. Haller. You have other questions that you want to address from what you heard from the commissioners?
And by the way, Mr. Shapiro, it's 2 lanes in this area, not 4.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Haller.
Yes, Mr. Lenhart, could you confirm the number of lanes in front of this site? I believe it's 4.
Yeah, that's correct. It's 4 lanes.
Thank you. And one of the other issues that I did want to address is Ms. Hartwell's comments about Prologis. And I just wanted to note that we, I mentioned this earlier, that, Prologis has a large number of facilities in the Washington metropolitan area. And those facilities are spread throughout the Washington metropolitan area. They have a substantial number of facilities in Loudoun County, Anne Arundel County, Howard County, and Prince George's County. And they select those sites based upon the zoning of the property and the access to the transportation network. I would like to ask, I know that you asked for a Representative Prologis to address this question, so I'd like to ask Ms. Danielle Schlein to comment a little bit further on that, but I did want to address that question.
Thank you. Ms. Schlein?
Thank you again, Danielle Schlein with Prologis, and thank you for the opportunity to address Ms. Hartwell and the Commissioner's statements regarding Prologis' site selections. Prologis considers and evaluates sites across the region in strong industrial markets where customer demand is high, there's access to good labor, and we look for industrial zoned sites with good transportation and distribution routes. To clarify for the record, Prologis owns and develops in many counties throughout Maryland and Virginia. Prologis' current ownership in the region is located with 23% in Loudoun County, with 4.3 million square feet right around the Dulles Airport, 19% in Anne Arundel County with 3.5 million square feet, 14% in Prince George's County with 2.6 million square feet, which is generally located right around the DC Beltway, and around 31% in Howard County with 5.7 million square feet. And these properties are located along 95 on the east side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schlein.
Thank you. One of the other issues that was raised was the issue of master plan conformance. And I want to address that in a little bit more detail. And so the operable master plan in this case is the 2006 Henson Creek Master Plan. And when that plan was done, they identified this general area as what was called the Henson Creek Transit Village. And they identified this area as an area where there could be a transformation of the properties along Livingston Road. This property was in the broader boundaries of the Henson Creek Transit District. And when you look at the land use plan, they didn't specifically identify a specific land use for each individual property. They put a general recommendation of mixed use within this area. Mixed use can include, and it states in the master plan, can include employment uses, retail uses, office uses, residential uses. When they actually went through and implemented the zoning, this property, as I mentioned earlier, the industrially zoned portion of this property had been industrially zoned since 1984. They retained that zoning in that location. There was a recommendation in the master plan to introduce a residential use into that area, and the property identified for that is the property at the corner of Oxon Hill Road and Livingston Road. If you look at the aerial photograph that's in front of you, it's the property on the bottom of the screen. That property was placed in the RT zone as part of the sectional map amendment for the 2006 Henson Creek Plan, and is proposed for townhouse development in accordance with the zoning that was assigned. The only other rezoning that occurred within the Henson Creek Transit Village to implement the recommendations of that plan was a small parcel of land that was zoned from commercial to industrial that's along Katy Drive, which is immediately south of this property. Katy Drive is that small cul-de-sac that you see just south of this property. And so as Mr. Dunn testified and as indicated in his written testimony, the county implemented the recommendations of the Henson Creek master plan through the implementation of zoning categories. And as part of that, they kept this property in the I-1 zone. Now, fast forward to 2021, when the county did a study of this area. If you look at the background information contained in the preamble of the study, it talked about the fact that nothing had happened. And so they did an economic analysis to look at some of the reasons why nothing had happened in this area and what possible future improvements could be done. And so as part of that study, and I just want to note that study was not an amendment to the plan. It was clearly it was just a study to evaluate possibilities for the future. And as Mr. Dunn indicated, the only specific recommendations that were contained in the 2006 master plan related to those designated areas called Area A and Area B of the master plan. And when the staff did their referral, they assumed that this property was in Area A, but because the recommendations for Area A generally related to Livingston Road, they said that the recommendations really weren't applicable to the property. Where in reality, this property isn't in Area A, and those recommendations aren't applicable to the property at all. And those recommendations talk about access to Livingston Road and improving the streetscape along Livingston Road, maybe redeveloping Livingston Road with a different type of commercial use, but those don't apply to this property. So when they did the study in 2021, one of the things that they identified as an impediment to development was the floodplain. And they specifically talk about this property, and they say that because of the historic use of this property, that it's created a pinch point in the floodplain. You can see where, in fact, most of this property is not in the floodplain because it was filled many, many, many years ago through the prior uses. And so if you look at the Henson Creek corridor, you see that this property, which has had fill put in it, restricts the flow of water through this area. And so one of the things that the study talks about, in fact, on page 6 of the study, it says recommendations also include restoration of impaired natural areas, including expanding wetlands and forest plantings and reconnecting streams to the floodplain. It says, while counterintuitive, expanding the floodplain in areas will help alleviate flooding downstream and giving the water a place to go. And that's exactly what we're doing as part of our restoration efforts, is helping to reconnect the floodplain and improve the flow of water through the site. And so what we are doing is implementing a very key component to the 2021 plan. Again, a lot of the 2021 plan talked about reconfiguring Livingston Road, and we've submitted evidence into the record that our development will not impede the ability to implement that recommendation as well. There is only one suggested potential land use study in that plan. And I would also state that there are aerial photographs showing the historic use of this property as an auto salvage yard. And the master plan says that we know that auto salvage yards often have pollution associated with them, but we don't have any environmental studies to know whether that exists in this case. But despite that comment, the only land use map that was shown in that study suggested the possibility that this property be redeveloped as a townhouse development, as residential. But on that specific development scenario, it says that this is just one of many ways to illustrate possibilities. And as we've told the board, and as we've told the community, this property can't be developed residentially. It still has too much residual contamination, and the environmental covenant prohibits that. Thus, that recommendation in the 2021 study, or that scenario that was envisioned in the study, was based upon incomplete evidence. And so our development is the only type of development that is supported based upon the environmental contamination. But the work that we're doing to restore the floodplain areas and to enhance the stormwater management are key components of the 2021 study and would be implemented by approval of this subdivision plan. And that's why we believe that this plan does actually conform to the requirements of the master plan. The requirement that the board has on master plan conformance is in section 24.121A5 of the ordinance. And it says that the preliminary plan and final plat shall conform to the area master plan, including maps and text, unless the planning board finds that events have occurred that either render the relevant recommendations no longer appropriate, or the district council has not imposed the recommended zoning. Well, in this particular case, the district council did approve the industrial zoning. It was consistent with the recommendation of a general mix of uses in this area, and the development is in accordance with that zoning. And as I said, the only guidelines in the plan don't even apply to this property because it's not in Area A. So we believe that we actually do conform to the recommendations of the master plan, but we clearly are not in contradiction to the recommendations of the master plan. And that was the same conclusion that your staff came to, is that we're not in contradiction to the recommendations of the master plan. I do want to also talk about the stormwater management, and I'm happy to talk about the environmental improvements that are being made to this site because they're massive. They're just massive. As I said before, the 21 study noted that one of the reasons why properties may not be able to develop in accordance with the vision is because there are pinch points in the floodplain. And so that's an issue that we've had to address. We've worked months with Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement to get approval of a stormwater management plan and a floodplain waiver. And one of the things that I would note is that I mentioned earlier that this property is 11.7 acres of existing impervious area. Under the regulations that we're required to comply with, we have to manage our stormwater to treat this site as though it's woods in good condition, not 11.7 acres of impervious area. The water running off of this site is going to be water running off at a flow rate and the quality of woods in good condition. That is a huge improvement, and that's even with the development that we're proposing. But I know that there were technical questions about it, so I'm going to ask Mr. Nick Barrick with KCI to testify and talk to you specifically about the stormwater management facilities that are being implemented on this plan, because I think Commissioner Durner had a question about impact of on both Henson Creek, but also Hunter's Mill Branch as well. So I'm going to ask Mr. Barrick to talk briefly about the technical aspects of what we're installing.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. We don't see you. Oh, there you are, Mr. Barrick. I do see you. Were you sworn in?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. Take on.
So again, for the record, my name is Nick Barrick. I'm with KCI Technologies. I'm a licensed civil engineer and been working for 20 years within Prince George's County. I'm also a certified third-party peer reviewer with Prince George's County DPI in the Site Road Division. For the stormwater management for this site, as Mr. Haller said, the existing impervious is 11.7 acres. In proposed conditions, the total impervious on the site is 6.2 acres. So that's a reduction right off the bat of 5.5 acres of impervious area. As Mr. Haller said too, when we look at stormwater management, we analyze the existing site, assuming everything is wooded in good condition, and we model using programs defined by Maryland Department of the Environment to calculate the runoff from that site. Again, is it woods in good condition? We then model the site in proposed conditions, and we are required by the state and the county to treat and manage that volume. So as Mr. Haller said, in proposed conditions, the stormwater management leaving the site is at a volume as if the entire site was wooded in good conditions. The stormwater management in itself, again, going down one layer from a technical standpoint, we manage from a quality standpoint and a quantity standpoint. The stormwater management facilities themselves are all micro practices, non-structural micro practices, which are the preferred method by Maryland Department of the Environment in Prince George's County. That includes micro bioretention facilities and submerged gravel wetlands. These facilities are installed. They have very small drainage areas. So there are several within the site, and they treat the site from a quality standpoint. Again, that volume is determined by that computation of equating the site to be woods in good condition. Once it's treated from a quality, the runoff then goes into a storage system, which is a structural practice. In this case, we're using storage pipes, and that is, again, to manage the required quantity volume. So for this site, we have a 100-year storm quantity requirement. So we, again, calculate the runoff, and we size that structural facility so that the water leaving the site from a quantity standpoint is less than or equal to the site as if it was all woods in good condition. So we do meet all required requirements by Maryland Department of the Environment, Prince George's County, with no waivers or any deviation from the required facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. And another issue that if the board needs more detail on it, I can ask Mr. Barrett to address this as well. But there was in one of the letters, I think it was from the Sierra Club, Ms. Gingold talked about the Woodland Conservation Ordinance, and I think the chairman asked about that as well. So let me comment briefly about that. As you know, the council adopted CB 20, which was intended to implement the new woodland conservation requirements that were adopted by the state of Maryland. Those requirements apply to applications that were filed or accepted after July 1st of this year. So they're not applicable to this site. However, as a result of Ms. Gingold's comment that we should be held to that same standard, I asked Mr. Barrick to do an analysis as to whether or not we would conform to the woodland conservation requirements under the new ordinance as well. And he did a calculation and confirmed that we would be in conformance. And you know, when you look at a couple of the main changes that were occurred in the with the new ordinances, the new ordinance in the prior ordinance, you had to replace trees. For every tree you took down, you had to do a replacement. But the replacement for trees that were removed above the mandated threshold under the old ordinance was 1/4 acre per 1 acre removed. Under the new statute, you have to replace trees at 1 acre for every acre removed. But as you can see, this site doesn't have many trees. Most of them have been destroyed already. So we don't have an issue with having an increased woodland conservation requirement because we're taking down trees above the threshold. The other big change in the woodland conservation ordinance is that it requires that you obtain a variance in order to satisfy your woodland conservation requirements off-site. And as you have heard throughout this the testimony today, we're meeting the woodland conservation requirements on-site, and we're meeting them in the area where you would want them to be met, adjacent to the stream channel and in the stream buffer. And so, from the standpoint of does this conform with the new requirements, even though we're not subject to those requirements because of the unique nature of this site? The answer is that it does, based upon the information that we received from KCI and their evaluation. So I think that should help the board have a better understanding for the benefits that are resulting from the development of this property. And I just have a couple of other minor issues that I wanted to mention. There was a comment, I think it was Commissioner Durner raised a question about lighting. The lighting that's used in this site is going to be the down-facing LED dark sky lighting. That's what Prologis always uses in its facilities. It allows them to achieve their LEED certification. It's not a requirement of LEED, but it's one of the factors that you can implement into a site to achieve LEED certification. And that's what Prologis does as a standard practice. So the lighting on this site will not light up the park or light up the stream valley. It will only light the property itself. So I wanted to mention that. Commissioner Bailey asked a question about emergency access. One of the things that we are doing currently, Taylor Acres Avenue dead ends into the site. There's no appropriate means for turning around. If you saw our proposed plan, you saw that we are constructing a cul-de-sac at the end of Taylor Acres Avenue that meets deep high standards and will allow for emergency access to the site and around the site for emergency vehicles, for trucks, for any vehicles that come to the site. We are going to be providing an appropriate turnaround to accommodate emergency vehicles. And then during the break the board took, we talked about a couple of the other issues that you raised, such as the solar roof and things like EV charging stations. And I do want to indicate to the board that, as Ms. Schlein said earlier, all of these buildings that they design are designed to accommodate solar roofs. The only reason they don't put them on as part of the initial construction is because they try to accommodate the needs of the tenant. But in this particular instance, the Prologis would be willing to accept a condition that requires that the building be constructed with a solar roof, and we will work with the tenants to accommodate that facility. And then the other thing that I had mentioned previously is that all of their facilities are constructed with infrastructure to accommodate EV charging stations and to allow that as EV demand grows, additional facilities can be added. So this site will be constructed with wiring and infrastructure for EV charging stations, and they will install 6 EV chargers as part of the day one opening of the building to accommodate existing EV vehicles, but also, as I said, it will be wired to accommodate as the demand expands to allow even more EV charging stations to be installed in the future. And I think that would conclude my comments in regard to answering the questions that were raised by the commissioners, and also in response to some of the comments of the representatives of the community.
I'm on mute. Sorry about that. So thank you for that, Mr. Howell. Mr. Leventhal, just as I said to Ms. Hartwell, we don't use the chat for information or questions. It's just for technical issues. Though I am noting that you had a question, again, clarification around what part of this is state road and what part of this is county road, and you bring that to us with some precision. So, Mr. Haller, I'm just, you know, can you get a little definitiveness with us about what's county and what's state here with either you or Mr. Lenhart, or maybe staff can help us with this?
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr.
Good
Chair.
afternoon, Ms. Gupta.
Yeah, I did look up the information. We have the GIS system that DPI maintains. Livingston Road in front of Taylor Acres Avenue is a county maintained road, and it is a 4-lane road at this time, 2 lanes in each direction.
Okay.
Does that
Thank
answer
you,
your
Mr.
question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, we had some other questions for staff as well as the applicants. I'm trying to go through my list. Maybe Ms. Gupta, you have a memory of some of the things that were coming your way.
Yes, and I wanted to say that our transportation planning section staff and community planning section staff is also in attendance to answer any questions from the commissioners regarding Commissioner Dorner's question about the criteria of approval or denial of a preliminary plan of subdivision. I think I'll defer to Mr. Warner, our legal counsel.
Thank you. And before we do that, though, Ms. Gupta, before we hear from Mr. Warner on the issues related to transportation, one of the things that we've been talking about is this question of what, you know, you consider vehicle volume, but you don't consider type of vehicle. And I'm trying to get an understanding of this, because one of the real issues of concern that I have about this overall is, yeah, it's zoned for environmental, I mean, it's appropriate for industrial use. But that doesn't mean every industrial use is going to have the same kind of impact. And here's an industrial use that is going to put a fair number of 18-wheelers on the road. And I'm just curious about how, if at all, that gets factored in by the regs, or even slightly more informally by you all.
I would defer to our transportation planning section to answer that detail, because they evaluate the traffic study.
Yeah, hi, Chair Shapiro and members of the board. Benjamin Ryan with the Transportation Planning Section. As Mr. Lenhart discussed, we use the Transportation Review Guidelines to document how we analyze various uses. Warehousing does not differentiate between passenger vehicles and trucks. So the Transportation Review Guidelines that we use does not have a difference in terms of how we account for vehicles and how they end up impacting the intersections.
Right. So you through your adequacy study, you just don't, that's not a factor.
It's not a factor. The TRG doesn't direct any specific methodology. And as Mr. Lenhart stated, this is how we've done plans. I've done a number of sites that require heavy vehicle movement, and there is no differentiation from the Transportation Review Guidelines.
Okay, all right, thank you. For the certificate of adequacy.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, am I forgetting any other questions that you all had that can be directed towards staff?
Mr. Chairman, could I?
Hold on one sec. I've chastised Mr. Leventhal and Ms. Hartwell, and I have to chastise Mr. Owens. Please, folks, do not use the chat. Please, please. You would have the opportunity to cross any of the witnesses. So once this is done, if you have specific questions for any of the folks who've testified, I'll provide that opportunity. But please stop using the chat. Thank you, Mr. Agitator Owens. I appreciate it. All right. So are there other questions for staff that I'm forgetting about?
Again, this is Mridula Gupta. There was a question by Commissioner Dorner regarding the business operations and hours of operation of the site. So that's a question for the applicant. What do they anticipate that to be? And also Commissioner Washington had a question about assurances from the applicant to the community regarding any community benefits that they are proposing or offering. That's from my list that I made.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta.
Thank you for staffing us on that. Now, I dare say, as helpful as that was, I'm not sure, and maybe we turn to you, Mr. Warner, to be clear with us around what is before us, considering that this is a preliminary plan of subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Shapiro. David Warner, Principal Counsel. There's obviously a lot of different planning issues involved in the review of a preliminary plan of subdivision application, as you can tell just by the length of the staff report. There have been a lot of questions about this master plan from 2006 and how it impacts the evaluation of this application. As the staff report points out, and this is correct, the master plan had a proposed land use for this area, and it doesn't coincide with what is necessarily proposed for this property. However, zoning is a very important element when evaluating master plan conformance, because if the district council makes the determination that a particular use is permitted, it has purportedly taken into account the master plan recommendation and decided, well, this is what we think is appropriate for this particular parcel. Master plans, as you know, are generally predictions or ideas or concepts that are planned for an area. They aren't necessarily law unless the district council adopts a law to make them have that kind of effect. And the district council did just that. They require this preliminary plan to be to conform to the master plan, unless there are reasons that that conformance doesn't get applied. Well, certainly the use of this property is appropriate because the zoning said it was okay. But there are, this is a 180-page master plan. There are a lot of other policies, guidelines, strategies that can be applied to this property. And the staff has gone through that about, I think, pages 5 through 10 of the staff report, analyzing a lot of these strategies and guidelines. And there may be other ones that are identified by the planning board that they also see as important for evaluating conformity. And then there's also a master plan of transportation, which has been, discussed in here, and that this Livingston Road is a collector road. Well, that has a certain type of a definition in the master plan, and conformance is required in a master plan of transportation. And so, if the planning board identifies elements in the master plan of transportation or in the Henson Creek master plan that are issues that require conformance outside of just the use of the property, those would be very applicable and considerations that are appropriate for the planning board to make. So that's kind of an overview of master plan conformance. there are other particular issues, we listed a lot of questions, and I don't know if there are other ones that you need my input on, but just let me know and I can answer those as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, other questions for Mr. Warner that would be helpful for him to answer at this point? All right. I do want to provide, if there's anyone from who testified in opposition, the chance to ask to have a brief cross, which basically means based on what you have heard from the folks who have testified, is there any question that you have for them based on the information they provided when they just testified? So come online, show your hand, and I'll allow a few minutes for that for sure. Mr. Owens, start with you.
Yeah, I want to reference the issue of 4 lanes. It is 4 lanes, but it also, considering the fact that when you go either way, it goes down to 2. And if you go towards...
I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't mean to interrupt Mr. Owens. It's David Warner, Principal Counsel. If you're cross-examining, you need to direct your question to a certain individual on the applicant's team. So maybe that would be the...
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Or Mr. Warner, correct me if I'm wrong, he can cross staff as well, right?
Sure.
So I think Ms. Gupta spoke to that specifically. So if you direct your question to Ms. Gupta, Mr. Owens.
Well, before he interrupted me, what I was going to say was to whoever the gentleman was from the applicant or the staff, either way, I was gonna get to that. But again, that interruption notwithstanding, what I'm going to ask is simply this: understanding that, yeah, right outside of Taylor Acres Road, it's 4 lanes, but knowing that it goes to 2 lanes in both directions and 1 close to 210, and keeping in mind what Mr. Shapiro asked about the kind of trucks, the kind of traffic, and understanding that there has been no ADT from DPWT on this road ever. If you speak to them, they'll tell you they don't have the budget to do it. What we really only have are intersection points there. So understanding all that, how can we make a substantive traffic review, understanding that all the data that we need to do that, and referencing Mr. Shapiro's concerns, not just at the intersections, but along that road, you're going to have backup. How do we make a substantive traffic review, knowing we don't have data from DPWT on annual daily traffic along Livingston Road? So again, that question can go to, I really don't need it to go to the applicant, because I'm sure they'll have some kind of an answer that is sort of maybe colored towards their side. I'm asking that to the staff that is representing the county and hopefully, presumptively, county residents.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Owens, I'm going to take that as a question, as cross-examination. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Jones. Hey, Mr. Jones, let me ask you to put yourself on mute. Thanks. So, Mr. Owens, again, cross-examination is questions based upon the testimony. So I'm going to, and that's what Mr. Warner was trying to help us with. It's a process issue, so I hope you don't take it personally, because he's just trying to be helpful to me. But Mr. Ryan, we'll take that as a question toward you. Does the question make sense to you, Mr. Ryan?
Yes, it does. And as Mr. Owens mentioned, we study intersections. That's how we develop adequacy. And with this site, we have 3 intersections. To the north of the site, Mr. Lenhart explained, even with the mitigation, it's failing, but the transportation review guidelines offer a way to achieve adequacy even with a failing intersection. To the south of the site, in relation to the changing to 2 lanes, I would mention that the last intersection we studied was the Livingston Road, Oxon Hill Old Fort Road. And even with accounting for the traffic of the site, that intersection received a grade of B and C in the AM and PM peak periods, which do indicate that the flow of traffic is sufficient for the intersection to handle it, even though we don't have the volume.
Correct. You don't have the short answer to that.
Yeah.
You don't have the information. That's the short answer to that.
Well,
Thank you.
I would say we analyze adequacy by studying intersections.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Other cross for staff or applicant, Ms. Brown?
I would like to ask a question. This is Janet Gingold.
Wait, I think I had Ms. Brown's hand up first. Ms. Gingold, hold on one sec.
Fine.
Ms. Brown, we can't hear you though. No, we can't hear you. It's the phone issue again. All right, Ms. Brown, you work on that. I'll go to Ms. Gingold. Again, a reminder, cross-examination. This is a specific question based upon testimony you've heard, question for staff or applicant. If you can direct it to question to somebody. And please resist the temptation to, make arguments. This really is cross-examination, okay?
Yes, this is a question for Ms. Gupta and the staff about the application of the new tree conservation ordinances. The applicant said that they did an analysis of whether the woodland conservation requirement, the more stringent woodland conservation requirements would be met, but clearly that's not really applicable because there are hardly any trees there to start with. But the tree canopy conservation, the tree canopy ordinance 2021, or CB 21 2024, and the stream buffer ordinance CB 22 2024 are also applicable here. Especially, I'm concerned about the stream buffer along Hunter Mill Branch in the southeast corner of the property, which is part of the floodplain. And I was hoping to find out whether your analysis included all three of those ordinances, because you only referenced the woodland conservation ordinance. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Gingold. Regarding the tree canopy coverage requirement, that is not evaluated with a preliminary plan of subdivision. It will be evaluated at the time of the building permit when a site plan is prepared and the applicant evaluates or provides a landscape plan and a tree canopy coverage plan. And the stream buffers, I believe they are shown on the tree, the type 1 tree conservation plan. I think our environmental planning staff is on the line to confirm that.
We have somebody from environmental planning. There's somebody here from environmental planning.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, don't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just getting my camera going here. Yeah, this is Tom Burke from the environmental planning section. This did come under the prior to July 1 regulation woodland conservation ordinance, so it's subject to the 2010 woodland conservation ordinance. The stream buffers are shown on the site and are being met fully with retention, preservation, and afforestation.
I'm sorry, but that doesn't answer the question about whether it would be consistent with the new ordinance. I'm pleading with you to please not use the old stuff when we really
Good
need to
morning.
use.
Good morning. I mean, good afternoon. Sorry. This is Katina Shows, Ms. Gingold. The buffers that were approved with the
Ms. Schollers, if you could introduce yourself with your title for the record, just for the public.
Yes, I'm sorry. Good morning. My name is, afternoon. It's been a long day. My name is Katina Shows, Division Chief of Countywide Planning. If your question is whether or not the buffers are subject to the buffers that were approved with the bills, the subdivision bills and the woodland conservation bills that were adopted this year that became effective July 1st, 2024. They are not. They are subject to the prior buffer regulations.
I'm still sad that you won't answer the question about whether they would be.
Yes. No, they would not, because this site is grandfathered from the bills that were adopted that became effective July 2020. So the ordinances that are in effect now, this case is grandfathered from those. They are not subject to these new laws because this application was accepted prior to July 1st, 2024.
Thank you for making that clear.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Kingo. All right, any other quick questions for staff?
My hand is raised.
I see Ms. Brown. Does somebody else have their hand raised?
Mine is up next.
Wait, I'm sorry. Everyone's talking at once, and we're in Zoom land, so I'm confused. Is that Ms. Richmond and Mr. Weiss? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So
Well,
let's
actually,
go-
it could go the other way around. It doesn't matter to me.
All right, and I see Ms. Hartwell as well. Again, I'm going to ask, we've got 4 folks speaking now. This is not an opportunity for testimony or making arguments. This is just questions for staff, okay? And we'll start with Ms. Brown, who's on the phone, and then we'll go to Ms. Richmond, then Ms. Hartwell, then Mr. Weiss.
So my question actually is to Mr. Haller or Ms. Gupta. Mr. Haller explained, and I think this may have been directed towards my comment about when I looked at the staff report, I saw nothing in the transportation and road improvements that dealt with adequacy or, dealing with Livingston Road in particular. And I believe Mr. Haller made the point that the new procedures, there's a different, that the standard was done and met. And my question to him is was that made available to the public, and can you send that to us? Because I don't recall that I've ever seen any adequate public facilities for transportation done for this project.
I can answer that question. The certificate of adequacy is included in the backup that was posted on the planning board website. So it is available. I think it's the last attachment to the planning board backup. So yeah, it is publicly available.
Okay. Can you summarize that? Because I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Summarize the certificate of adequacy?
Yes.
Ms. Brown, respectfully, Ms. Brown, the purpose of this is cross-examination. So the information is there, though, and it is available to the public.
Okay, I will check. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Let me just note for her benefit, it's pages 163 to 172 of the backup.
Thank you, Mr. Haller.
Okay, so there were several backups. So which one?
Ms. Brown, hold on one sec. Ms. Jones, can I ask you to help Ms. Brown with this too, to make sure she gets this information? Because I want to make sure she gets it too. Jessica, you there? Maybe not. Ms. Brown, we'll make sure you get the
The link
information.
entitled Backup Revised, Ms. Brown.
Good afternoon. How are you, Dee? I'm great. How are you today?
All right, Ms. Brown, I'm going to move on to somebody needs to mute who's talking in the background. Ms. Richmond.
Yeah, I just have a question regarding your role as the planning board. If there's some discrepancies with regards to the lanes and how it's configured, because again, I'm boots on the ground. So if it's some questions about how it's truly operates and configured, and I recognize that the person said that there's some is not adequate, but do you get to see the board itself get a aerial view or have an understanding on what he means when he says it's inadequate? And then even do you get a chance to look at, is it even possible to make any changes to make it adequate? Because there is some questions around if that's possible. So I just was curious about, how does the planning board proceed if there's some debate on whether it's 2 lanes, 1 lane, 3 lanes? Because I can tell you what it is, but I know this is not debate time. But do you get a chance to review it yourself to make a determination on who's right and who's wrong? That's what I want to know.
I hear you, Ms. Richmond. I'm going to take that as a question to staff. I'm going to take that as a question to Mr. Ryan. And perhaps in a nutshell, you can address that for Ms. Richmond.
Yes, and thank you for the question, Ms. Richmond. Benjamin Ryan from the Transportation Planning Section once more. As we mentioned, we do determine adequacy by addressing intersections. And when we look at each intersection, we apply the specific layout of that intersection to the traffic that's being generated. So an example, the intersection north of this site, which is currently failing, the mitigation includes constructing a second left turn lane so that the intersection can change and we would analyze the traffic differently. And the certificate of adequacy, which is in the backup, does show that even though the north intersection is failing, they have mitigated more than 150% of their development, which puts it in adequacy. The site access point is adequate. And then the last intersection we studied, which was Livingston Road and Oxon Hill, we found that to be adequate. So each intersection, we analyzed the layout, the amount of left turns, if there's a free right or not. And that is how the CLV is determined, which is the critical lane volume.
And Ms. Richmond, I'm going to add to that because your question was also, do we get to see that level of detail? The short answer is yes. That's what's in the backup. Next, we have Ms. Hartwell and then Mr. Weiss.
Mr. Weiss is on another, I think, oh no, he's here. Great. This is directed to Ms. Schlein. She gave us a roster of locations for Prologis facilities. And Ms. Schlein, I just want you to confirm that you do not have facilities that are in Montgomery County or along the 270 corridor between Bethesda, Maryland and Frederick, Maryland.
Ms. Hartwell, give Ms. Schlein a second to pop back on.
I was having technical difficulties. Thank you for the question.
You're not alone with that. You got the question, Ms. Schlein?
Yes, Prologis does not own industrial facilities in Montgomery County.
And the reason why I make that clear is that, you know, these areas between Bethesda and Frederick are predominantly white. There is a major corridor there for
Ms. Hartwell, it's not a time for an argument. You were just asking.
No. I'm just circling around and just finishing my point. I'm not arguing. I'm just confirming.
Right. The purpose of CROSSO is just to ask questions. So if you got a question for Ms. Schlein, fair game to ask a question.
Okay, well then I'll put it in a question form. Have you done demographic studies on these locations, and can you verify that the communities where you are located are predominantly Black and brown?
No, we have not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartwell. Thank you for being patient with me as well. Mr. Weiss, cross-examination, sir.
The trip generation is just based on the overall number of trips. yes, there are a number of truck bays, but typically the way these work, the truck will come in, they'll sit at the bay for a while they unload or load. You'll notice if you look at the plan, there are quite a few parking spaces for employees. And the predominant amount of traffic is passenger vehicle type trips. And so we don't have the breakdown exact, but predominantly it is, again, employee trips.
I can respond to that. I mean, because we do not have an identified tenant yet, we do not know the exact makeup of the trips, but the certificate of adequacy establishes a trip cap based upon the nature of the proposed use, and will be subject to that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weiss. All right, if there's no other questions on the cross, then we're going to go back to the applicant. You have an. All right, somebody?
Yeah, Michael Leventhal.
Mr. Leventhal, okay, go ahead.
Patricia Munro also has a question.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Leventhal and Ms. Monroe.
Trucks that will be coming into this site daily because you don't have a tenant, given your other sites, because you must have a breakdown of what is a profit-making enterprise. How many trips do trucks daily take in your other warehouse projects, as to be used as a gauge as to how many trucks would be coming here, even though you don't have the right tenant identified? There's got to be some understanding mathematically.
Or staff, but really the trip cap, the maximum number of trips that's allowed, is, I imagine, what you're going to be most concerned about. So if you could just go through, Mr. Howler, maybe you consider this a question about the trip cap. And what's the maximum number of trips that you would expect to be, that is being in the certificate of adequacy allowed from the site?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just let me note for the record that the certificate of adequacy has already been approved. And so it really isn't an issue for the preliminary plan of subdivision, but the trip cap, which is condition 1 of the certificate of adequacy, is that the total development within the preliminary plan of subdivision shall be limited to uses that generate no more than 131 AM peak hour trips and 169 PM peak hour vehicle trips. And Mr. Lenhart may want to supplement what I'm about to say, but when we do these traffic studies, when we don't have a specific tenant in mind, we evaluate traffic based upon what could be there. There are different traffic generation rates for basic warehouses and different ones for more logistics warehouses. The logistics warehouses generally tend to generate more trips. And so for a worst case scenario evaluation, we assume that it would be a logistics warehouse that would generate the larger number of trips in order to not be in a situation where if we had a tenant come in who might generate more trips than what the trip cap was, that we'd have to go back through the adequacy process again. But the trip cap that was assigned is based upon the assumption that it will be a logistics type user, but we don't have the exact tenant yet. Mr. Lenhart, did I state that accurately?
Yes, Mr. Haller, you did. I'm happy to add to, but I think you said that perfectly.
Thank you. Mr. Leventhal, any other questions for you in cross-examination?
Just so that I understand, you're talking about 100, at least 100 trips in the AM, which is designated as what hours to what hours, and 100 in the PM, which is what hours to what hours, just so I have an idea of how many trucks are traveling down the road?
Trucks and passenger vehicles, both. It's not making the distinction.
Allow me to take this. So the county has general rates for warehousing. Those rates tend to be higher than industry standards. The Institute for Transportation Engineers has a trip generation manual that has uses in there for warehousing. The county's rates generate significantly higher than what ITE would typically suggest for similar use. And that would be, if you use the county's general warehousing rates, it would be 56 trips in the morning peak hour, 56 trips in the evening peak hour. That's 45 in, 11 out in the morning, 11 in, 45 out in the evening. That's for general warehouse. As Mr. Haller indicated, because we don't have an exact use yet, we took a conservative position that perhaps this could be more of a logistics or fulfillment center type warehouse, which would generate 123 trips in the morning peak hour, 169 trips in the evening peak hour. So in the morning, that would be 100 in, 23 out. In the evening, it would be 66 in, 103 out. And these are based on empirical data. The gentleman asked for examples of how much traffic is generated at other sites. This is calculated using empirical data that is collected at many other locations, not necessarily Prologis, but similar warehouse type locations. And that's how we, as traffic engineers, are able to project how much traffic would be generated by a given use.
Thank you, Mr. Lenhart. All right, Mr. Leventhal, any other questions for you? Cross-examination?
No, just as a 15-year traveler going to work, I'm just saying those many trucks are going to cause an issue. That's
Mr. Leventhal, I got to stop you. I'm sorry. Move on to the next last question. I believe this is Ms. Monroe.
Yes, it is. And I'm going to ask this question, but I want you to think about this. So in the traffic study, it says that there's a failure at that particular intersection. And even when they redesign it, redevelop it, it's still going to be a failure. Would you want to have to deal with that on a daily basis if you lived in this area? That is my question.
Who are you asking the question to, Ms. Monroe?
I'm asking that of the Prologis representative.
You
know it's a traffic failure.
This is Michael Lenhart again. Just, I think we testified to this earlier, but just to reiterate, the improvement that we are making at that intersection will mitigate 456% of this site's traffic. This intersection of two-tenant Livingston operates better with this project and with their improvement than it would without it.
So,
Ms. Monroe, yes. I just want to be clear, right? Whether or not it actually happens is a separate issue, right? But the data is, and the experts are saying, and the requirement is that the traffic should be improved if this project is improved.
It somewhat, but it still fails. Now this, I'm reading.
Yes, no doubt at all. No doubt at all. I'm with you.
Okay. There's traffic study that says it would fail even with the improvements. All I'm saying is that what you want to deal with on a regular basis?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. So we have no more questions on cross. I'm going to.
I have a question. I have one more question, Mr. Shapiro.
Yes, Mr. Owens, go ahead. Who are you directing it to?
It'll be the staff, but also the gentleman who from Prologis also tried to answer this question earlier. Because you referenced section 24-121A5 of the prior subdivision regulations, where the staff says that the plat shall conform to the area master plan unless the planning board finds that events have occurred to render the relevant recommendations within the plan no longer appropriate, no longer applicable, or the Prince George's County District Council has not imposed the recommended zoning. My question is, which one of those is it? And could you list what those events are, what's no longer applicable, or has the Prince George's County District Council indeed not imposed the recommended zoning?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question.
Mr. Warner, please.
Mr. Owens, as was explained in the testimony, that the 2006 by the applicant, the 2006 master plan rezoned the property, and so when it rezoned that property, it allowed this industrial use. So the zoning, the council did not implement the correct the zoning that was proposed by the master plan. However, in 2018, and then through the Countywide Master Plan Amendment in 2021, they rezoned this property again to IE. And so that would be an event that occurred subsequent to the development of the plan that would also render the recommendations on the use in the master plan is no longer relevant. So it's both.
So again, just so I'm clear, you're saying the master plan is no longer relevant and the district council, can you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, so that was kind of what I was trying to explain to the planning board. Master plan is 180 some pages, has a fantastic, in my personal opinion, plan for the future of this area. There's a section on proposed land uses, and those have been superseded by what the district council did in terms of allowing an industrial use on this piece of property. But there are plenty of other provisions in the master plan that are applicable and that this project does need to conform to. And that's what staff has tried to identify in its pages 5 through 10 of the staff report. We're like, even though this use is permitted by the district council, here are other strategies and policies in the plan that this project conforms to, and then they go through that analysis. So it's hard to encapsulate 180 pages into one answer. But as far as the use goes, district council said this use is permitted, but the other provisions of the plan that this project has to conform to have been analyzed in the staff report as well.
All right, Mr. Owens, thank you. If there's no other questions under cross, I'm going to turn to the applicant for any rebuttal and then close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a few brief comments. First, with regard to the discussion, the question that Mr. Owens just asked, just so the board is clear in terms of this issue. As the board knows, because you've prepared and adopted a lot of master plans and sectional map amendments over the years, in a typical land use plan, there is a color-coded map that conforms generally with the type of zone. Gray generally denotes industrial, red generally denotes commercial, yellow generally connotes residential. In the 2006 plan, they used a striped pattern to designate this general area as mixed use. They did not put a color on specific properties. But when they implemented the plan, there was no, and as you know, particularly under the old ordinance, because this master plan was done under the old ordinance, we only had a handful of mixed use zoning options available to us. And so when you look at the zoning categories that were implemented in the sectional map amendment, there were no mixed use zones. They didn't use MXT, MUI, or any of those other mixed use zones. Each property was given a separate use category. Some of them were CM, some of them were I1, some of them were CSC. And then, as I mentioned, there was one specific property that was rezoned to RT at the southern end of the transit district. So the master plan recommendation was for mixed use. The zoning categories on the entire district were not mixed use. So our belief and our contention is that, in fact, because they implemented the mixed use recommendation through an assortment of Euclidean industrial, residential, and commercial zones, that the zoning on the ground conforms to the master plan recommendation. However, even if you were to argue, well, they should have put it into a mixed use zone, they didn't. They put it into an industrial zone where industrial uses are permitted. And for example, residential uses are not. So our proposal conforms with the zoning on the ground and implements the recommendation of the master plan in that fashion. Our belief, and I think Mr. Dunn's testimony was, we do conform to the master plan, but even if you were to take the position that mixed use land use designation means MXT zone, they didn't use the MXT zone, they used the I1 zone. So that I just wanted to put that clarification on, because I think the planning board often looks at these land use maps in terms of color coding based upon land use, and that's not what happened here. So I just wanted to make that point. I want to make one other comment just to supplement what Ms. Schlein said about, there was a question about, do you have facilities in Montgomery County? But I don't know if the board is aware of this, but Montgomery County has very limited industrial zoning in the 270 corridor. There's a reason why they're not in the 270 corridors, because the land isn't available. Prologis tries to find sites that are zoned and where their uses are allowed. And so that's why they selected this site. That's why they select sites in all of the other corridors that they mentioned. And I just wanted to make that point. The final thing that I wanted to comment on, and I apologize, I didn't touch on this earlier, but Ms. Gupta reminded me that Ms. Bailey asked a question about community engagement. And I think I did put in a little short summary of some of our community engagement efforts, but we've been working with GS Proctor Associates for the past year plus, reaching out to community associations and having meetings. We've had multiple meetings with the South County Environmental Justice Coalition, and we have talked to them about some types of community benefits. Now, I'll be honest with you, they have consistently asked us, despite the fact of the property contamination and the restricted use that we have as a result of the covenant, to find another location for this facility and build some different use on the property. And as we've explained to them, Prologis is a logistics warehouse developer, and they purchased the site because of the zoning that was there. And the environmental covenant does not give us the freedom, for example, to develop it with a residential use. But there are a number of things that they did ask us about, and that we have that we are in communication with. They talked about the rooftop solar, and we explained to them about our program to make it rooftop solar ready. And as I've indicated, if the board prefers that this site be developed day one with solar, that we can accommodate that. They asked also about electric vehicle use, and we told them about our program to provide EV charging stations. They asked us if we would consider putting air quality monitors on site because of the concerns about air pollution. We indicated to them that we would work with MDE and with the University of Maryland to evaluate whether this was an appropriate location for an air monitoring site. And if it is deemed to be an appropriate location, we would put a site on an air monitoring station on the site. One of the concerns that they had was about trucks going through residential neighborhoods. And we indicated to them that we would make sure that we developed a recommendation for a recommended truck route map that would avoid residential neighborhoods. We would make sure that that map was posted within the workspaces of the warehouses, and put in all of the employee lounges to make sure that anybody that drives in and out of the facility knows what residential neighborhoods to avoid. One of the other questions they asked was about providing office space for community meetings. And we indicated to them that we couldn't commit to that on this specific site because we don't have a tenant at this point, but that we do have a program where Prologis works with community groups to identify locations where they do have available space. And we provided them the name and phone number of Ms. Schlein to be able to contact them if they were looking for space for any community activities. So that's just an example of some of the things that we've discussed with them. We also talked to them about the fact that Prologis has an annual impact day that they organize, where employees throughout the country, throughout the company and throughout the country get engaged in community activities and community causes. And we indicated we would love to partner with them to identify a community cause in this area that we could identify for Impact Day to have our employees participate in a community event. So those are the types of things that we've proposed to them as part of a community benefits package. And we're going to continue to work with them and have conversations with them about that.
Mr. Haller, still you
Yes.
for any further rebuttal and then close, unless that's all you have for us.
That's all I have at this point. I'm happy to, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I think we've addressed all the questions that have been presented to us.
Okay.
Excuse me. This is Miss Monroe. So there was a meeting last week. I might be speaking out of turn. And the offer on the table for us was, we'll give you turkeys and book bags.
Ms. Monroe, I hear your frustration loud and clear. The way the process though is, and Mr. Haller may want to address this, but that's all right. The process is that the applicant has the final word. So we'll take what you say. Hold off though, Mr. Haller, you or your.
Well, if she has the final word, can I say one more thing with a question? Here's the question. Does I can't remember the man's name. It's the opposite side of Livingston Road on the corner of, it goes back to the Mrs. Washington's concern about the medical access. And it's on that corner. Does the study, because we're focusing on the 210 access, but does the study, or whether it will be in consideration, because we're thinking that the tenant is going to always go north towards the Beltway, but they could go south towards 301. So does the study or consideration talks about the 18-wheelers turning on Oxon Hill Road, heading back up to 210? And does the study include traffic considerations around that? Because it goes back to Mrs. Washington's concern about medical access. That's what I need to know.
Thank you. I'm going to take that question and no more questions.
Okay.
But we'll take that. We'll consider this still under cross. So that question, I imagine, will be directed to Mr. Lenhart around does it take into account trucks that head south on Livingston Road toward 301 as well?
Let me make sure I understand that. Could you please repeat it, just so I make sure I'm clear on it?
No problem. Right now, if you come out of Taylor Acres, everybody's assuming that the trucks are going to go left. But what if the trucks go right, because they may have tenants, or maybe they want to come up the 301 because we get a lot of traffic that way? Does the study consider any traffic considerations for that corner on Livingston Road and Oxon Hill Road?
Okay, thank you. I understand. Yes, it does. We scoped out the project with, again, with Park and Planning, Transportation staff, State Highway Administration, DPW, and DPI. The agreed upon trip assignment after discussing with them was that 65% of the site traffic would go north on Livingston up to the 210 intersection at Palmer. And the remaining 35% would make a right out of the site and go down toward Oxon Hill and Old Fort Road. And again, that's the overall site traffic. So that would be a mix of whatever the employee and truck traffic would be.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Richmond. This is the last time, but Mr. Haller, we are back to you for any further rebuttal and any further close that you have before we close the hearing.
Right, and I do want to just make a brief statement in response to Ms. Monroe's comment. As I mentioned, that Prologis does have a program that they institute around the country and around the world called Impact Day. We've had requests from communities. We had a request in Chevrolet if we would participate in a turkey giveaway program. And as part of their working with the community, their Impact Day activity was to fulfill the community's wish to do that. We had a similar request in another community to provide a book bag giveaway, and they participated in that event because that's what the community asked them to do. If this community would like them to participate in an activity, they would consider that as part of the impact. I just want the board to understand that context. And so I guess in closing, I just want to note, I think it's very clear from our presentation, the extent of the work that Prologis has done to improve this site. They've put a substantial effort into cleaning up the site. They purchased the property because it is zoned for the use that they are proposing. They have satisfied all the county requirements in terms of providing the traffic studies, the environmental studies, and all of the pre-application approvals that are required in order to obtain approval of a preliminary plan of subdivision. Prologis is a company that goes above and beyond normal requirements and wants to stay a step ahead of market trends in terms of sustainability, EV charging, solar. They are a company that cares about the environment and cares about the communities in which they're located. And we think that this is an example of a project that once it's done will be a substantial improvement in terms of its environmental impact because of all of the efforts that they have expended to improve the site. We appreciate the planning board's consideration, and we're requesting that the planning board approve the application in accordance with staff's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. So with that, unless the commissioners, there's any other questions for the applicant or staff, I will close this public hearing. And it is to us for deliberation and consideration of action. Let me start just briefly, and then I'm curious where you all are too. That there's no doubt that this is complicated, and I've heard lots and lots of issues that raise concerns for me. At the end of the day, it is an industrial use, but again, not all industrial uses have the same kind of impact. And the big issue that I'm hearing over and over is what the impact would be of these 18-wheelers, however many there would be, on Livingston Road, which is a collector road, and it would take us through a pretty significant, what is aspirationally intended to be a real transit village. That's the thing that raises the most concerns with me. The flip side of that is it's clear as day that the applicant is making a pretty significant commitment to improving the environment through the work that they're doing on the site. And even with a reduction of impervious surfaces in addition to the preservation of woodlands and all those things. So, that environmental impact piece I'm balancing out. I think where I land on this for my colleagues is, despite all of the concerns that I hear in the community, I think that the applicant has made a good enough case that the goods outweigh the bad. Again, there's no getting around the impact from the 18-wheelers. The traffic improvements that are being made, at least to the intersections, will mitigate some of that, and that gives me some comfort around it too. I absolutely guarantee that that's not a satisfying enough answer for many of the folks on this call, but I think in our role and with what we have to consider, what we have to evaluate, and the data that we have to work with, that's where I land, is that I'm inclined to support this for the reasons as I have laid out. And there may be other things that come along, but I'm curious where you are all as well. So we're under deliberation, and then based on how the deliberation goes, we may consider taking action. But under deliberation, colleagues, other thoughts, reactions that you all have?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly, well, let me just add, this is very difficult, very difficult. And I want to, again, thank everyone for coming out to testify. And Mr. Haller, I would like to also thank you for your responses. And let me just say that I think Mr. Lenhart should have been on at the very top, because I'm right there with the chairman in terms of the 18-wheeler impact. And I'm not resolute, quite frankly, myself in terms of how I feel about that. And I think Ms. Monroe put a fine point on it when she said, is this where you would want to live? And I'll answer that I would not want to live there. But on balance, and that's how we have to function as a board, taking everything into consideration. The intersection is not ideal now, but the improvements that will be made or have been made will make it better than it is. So that is an absolute plus. the chairman mentioned the economic benefits as well as the environmental impact in terms of the cleanup. And I would also, because I actually did raise this in my question, and Mr. Holler, thank you for augmenting your comments as part of your close in terms of the engagement with the community. And, you know, I know that because you've been before us many times before, have always worked with the community, and I would strongly encourage you to continue to do that. As Delegate Woods indicated, she was the first person to provide testimony and comment, and make sure that, you know, we're creating a spirit of good neighbors between the, you know, existing residents as well as, and I keep saying Polaris, but I'm actually thinking about that little thing that swims around in my pool, so forgive me. But the applicant, so I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, until we're ready for any further action.
Mr. Chairman, I want to take a moment to thank all the citizens for spending the day with us. It's been a kind of a long process, and they've stuck with us and shared their opinions, and I do appreciate that. We're in a strange, I am in a strange predicament because I understand a lot of the concerns that the citizens have. But it also seems like it's an opportunity for improvement in one sense. So I'm kind of struggling with that, and we'll have to make a decision within the next 30 seconds. But I do want to thank the citizens for coming out and expressing their opinions and giving us something to think about, a lot of something to think about. So thank you very much for coming and spending the day with us. And we will hopefully get to an end of this very shortly.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Much appreciated. Commissioner Dorn, anything from you?
Yeah, I'll start out just saying thank you to all the citizens coming on and spending so much time with us. I know why Commissioner Giraldo wanted to find an ethical conflict so he could not get yelled at by his neighbors later on, whichever way this goes down, because I guarantee he's going to hear about this kind of stuff later at some point. But I think there are a lot of really good points that were made today by the citizens and things that were raised. I think there was missed opportunities, Mr. Haller, for you to have engaged with the community, and particularly to just describe your company that you're working for with the client, because if you listen from kind of like an outsider standpoint, not knowing any background on REITs or anything, then you might not know what this company does, and it might sound like it's just targeting a certain area that's advantageous to bring in this kind of use that may not be desirable for certain people. In reality, this is a major logistics real estate company, which means that they rent out warehouses and then they find tenants to occupy those later on, and they store goods and get those goods around. That means there's going to be jobs in these areas, and this is a major company that is very big on green. It does green bonds for financing, which we've been involved with in my other job in terms of like the finance side, not with this particular company, but in sort of this new environmental area that I was very interested in. And that's why I pushed Mr. Haller early on, because I know the company is very big on green stuff, and it didn't, to me, seem very like they were going the whole way as much as they could. So I much appreciate the efforts towards the end in talking a little bit more about what the company does overall and what it will do to this particular area, especially when it looks and finds tenants, assuming that this goes through and you actually get to breaking ground. It is kind of an odd case because we've seen a number of changes that have happened where there was an intention for this area in the plans, and that changed. From our perspective, though, we're not legislators, so we can't write the code or change the code, even if we don't think that the code is how it should be, or we might disagree with how it was actually happened. We just have to kind of take what it is and make a decision based upon, is it in conflict or not. When the county council changed some of their intentions for this particular site, that allowed this use to be there. And from my perspective, I'm not seeing anything which would be quote unquote like illegal or against the code or against the provisions, against the land use regulations for this particular use. There are things that aren't quite great. The failing intersection is not nice, but that happens in other places as well. I've got one that's not so great near me, and it's not fun, but it works. It doesn't mean that it's completely inoperable, and it's going to be a lot better with the improvements that they're making here. So when I'm looking at a lot of what we've heard today, I'm not finding anything that would be against the quote unquote rules or against the code or against the things that we actually have to weigh the evidence against. I'm hearing a ton of things about undesirable attributes of this, and things that just wouldn't be nice or things that just make me feel a little bit uneasy. But that's not something that we can use to vote against it, unfortunately. I would encourage all of you to remain active in this case because you're going to get another bite at it later on. So you continue to get different kinds of aspects where you can be involved later potentially, and also communicate with your county council. If you don't like how things are happening in your area, send that feedback back to your county council and communicate with them. But the way that things are kind of standing right now for me, I think that this is fine to go forward. It's not my ideal idea, or it wouldn't be my ideal project given how there's some of the things that just don't seem really great, as have been described by the citizens. I think there's legitimate concerns, but that doesn't mean that they're not allowed, and that doesn't mean that this particular property usage isn't possible. And my hope is that Mr. Howley does continue to interact with all of you. And he does bring really nice things to this community, and that he follows through with all these things with this client. And this is hopefully a much better outcome later down the road than what it seems like it might be now. But I would encourage all of you to stay involved with Mr. Haller. He does interact quite a bit with citizens when they come out, and is very responsive to transportation and other kinds of issues, as we've seen with other clients that has come forward. So keep him on your speed dial, and keep talking with them and everything. But at least for right now, on my view, I vote in favor of this particular case. But I definitely appreciate all the feedback and the consideration and everything and the involvement. I think there were great questions and great points, because I went back and forth a couple of times in terms of where I was leaning on certain things, and it was partially because of things that people said. So thank you for the thoughtful engagement today.
Thank you. I have nothing else to add on that. I appreciate all of the comments. I really want to join with my colleagues in thanking everybody for spending the day with us. You all are volunteers, and you're just doing what you can do to help improve the quality of life for your community, and I really appreciate that. Commissioners, if there's no further deliberation on this, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the findings of staff and approve preliminary plan 4-23008, TCP 1-007-2027, excuse me, TCP 1-007-2024, and variance to section 25-122B1G, along with the conditions as outlined in staff's report. And I would also add 2 proffered conditions by the applicant to include a solar roof, as well as day one, ensuring that 6 charging stations are available, as well as the electrical is included for future EV charging stations.
Second.
We got a motion by Commissioner Washington and a second by Vice Chair Bailey. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Washington.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Dorner.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 4-0. Thank you, commissioners. I want to thank everyone again for your engagement on this issue, and look forward to more engagement like this in the future. Commissioners, this concludes all the items for today's agenda. I want to thank everyone on the staff as well, and the applicant on this case. And Ms. Connor, is there any further business to come before the planning board today?
No.
And there is no further business before the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Then without objections, colleagues, This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.